I did a training about literally 4 weeks ago, and it's really, that one was geared towards adolescents preparing for adulthood. So it was really gearing it towards the kids themselves, although obviously the adults in their life is the ones that's going to gear it. This one is more geared towards the parents, which actually could be for all ages of those who have children on the autism spectrum. I feel like this is one of our passions, and I'm getting ahead of myself in my PowerPoints only because it's, you know, I don't know, those of you who have worked with those who have autism spectrum, it just seems like there's lots of emphasis on little kids and even adolescents, but somehow magically, when they hit 20, they don't have it anymore in the eyes of the world. Of course, that's not true, but sometimes that's why I want to present information that can help prepare. My goal in the future is that we have more opportunities to help children become adults successfully. And so that's really the focus of this training. Let me pull up my PowerPoint. So here's a little breakdown of today's schedule. We'll probably be done before 1, based on my estimations. I wanted you to see this because I feel like this is, again, me modeling to you what autistic people need is clarity. Not just saying I need, we're going to be doing A, B, and C, but really being able to say, this is how we're going to be doing it so that they know. That helps them anticipate, which reduces their anxiety. That's really, sometimes you might hear me repeat certain things because it's important to recognize that sometimes when they can anticipate, they may not like it, but it certainly helps them understand, oh, this is what's happened. It helps build trust and predictability. So that's what I wanted you to have, a little information first, and then we'll get started with the video of people's angst.
I try not to think into the future, what he'll do when I'm not here anymore. His dad, me and his dad are not around, and how will he live on his own because his room is chaotic. Really chaotic. It's just everything everywhere. He won't throw anything away. Things are broken, and he'll say, no, I want to keep them. So I'm thinking, my thoughts are, I just don't want him to be a lonely adult. I hope that he'll meet someone who'll understand him and appreciate his good points, because he is very kind.
There are times when I get very worried and I lie awake at night thinking, is he ever going to be able to leave home? Is he ever going to be able to be independent? In recent times, I'm seeing that there is a change, and he is thinking a little bit more about problem solving for himself and options, and he gets into situations where he has to make a decision because it hasn't quite worked out the right way. He's making better decisions. So I think it's all going to come. It's all going to come, but it's going to be a lot slower. And he'll always need someone to be giving him good, solid advice. And that's why it's having a good network around him, with people apart from us that he can trust and talk to that really care about him.
We've tried to get him to the best school that we know about. We've got some external support groups that we've put in place and joined. So there's the group that he goes to on a weekend, which is a bunch of other Asperger's kids and their parents, and that's good from our point of view, because the kids can go off and they can talk themselves, and it's a supportive environment, and they are quite friendly to each other, and then the parents can talk about all the challenges they face and different strategies they have. So it's a good support group for the parents as well.
I think we try and do a lot of things in a practical sense. We don't just talk about them. So things that we take for granted, being able to get on the bus, know which bus to get on the train, how to buy a train ticket, managing money. We often use a lot of computer games because he loves computer games. We'll get computer games that are about that type of thing. You've got your Sim Cities, and there's a few others which are all about, designing a city and a life and all that type of thing. So in that virtual world, he's sort of practicing a bit. And yeah, just giving him lots of practical little experiences of things.
We've been advised by the multidisciplinary team that are caring for him not to overload him, and just to kind of cope with challenges as they arrive. And if he asks, then we will. If we're going somewhere, we'll say to him, we'll try and explain the scene to him, and we'll say, you know, this is how it's going to be, and normally people will do this, you know, and they won't do this. So we'll point out, you know, the unspoken rules that most of us understand. We don't know how we do, but we do. So we know that we don't, you know, go into a person's bedroom and start rifling through the drawers when we go to visit them and things like that. You know, we just know it's wrong. So we kind of just try and prepare him ahead for things that are upcoming. I mean, it didn't work too well for high school. We tried to prepare him for that, and that was incredibly traumatic for him. You know, his first 3 months at high school. So you can try and prepare, but the experience that the individual meets up with doesn't always, you know, you can't cover every eventuality.
I can see that Ellis is going to have enormous problems just coping with some of the stuff that I can recall a long, long time ago at high school that I had to go through just as a normal kid. And that was tough enough as it is without having the additional baggage to carry around of Asperger's. But I think once he gets through that, and if he can get through that, then I know from listening from the research I've done and what people have told me that, and working with the group of people that I do, that the sort of attitudes that he's got and the work ethic and the interest that he's got will probably stand him in good stead professionally and throughout his adult life. So I'm really quite optimistic about how he will go eventually. It's just it's going to be a hell of a road to get him there, that's all.
He presents beautifully, and that's going to be great. If he can find the right avenue and career, maybe be a politician or a debater or something like that, he would do very well.
Interestingly, all the occupations that he's mentioned are all caring ones. So, you know, he's talked about being a vet, a doctor. One of the things he said he would like to do, because one of my brothers is a computer programmer, he said, I'd quite like to do that because I really like computers. And so that was a bit of a deviation from the caring bit, but then I suppose he's caring for people's recreation. Yeah, but that's what he's kind of generally said, and he's stuck with the vet and the doctor. I'd be interested to see how he copes with them. I would never ever say to him about anything, do you think you can do that? You know, I'd always encourage him to follow his aspirations.
So what was that like for you? So Christina, when you see that, and also just the clients you have worked with, what does that stir up in you?
It resonates with me with the clients that I work with, mostly because a lot of the clients aren't ready when they turn 18. They don't know, you know, basic things that we assume that they should know. And when they turn 18, we're assuming that they already know. And so they're not prepared really for the bigger world.
Anyone else? Any thoughts on that? My experience is that typically as teenagers, the expectations is that parents will parents assume that, especially if they are more mainstreaming, doing things like they have some struggles, but their autism is at a level that they can they're functioning in certain areas, that they just assume that they should be picking up things like everyone else. And like I've said, if you've ever been to any of my trainings before, I like to say over and over again that we need to make what's covert overt, because what a lot of us learned as kids intuitively, or our parents told us, you know, or we learned from other people, it has to be very much more clear, and it takes a little longer in that respect. So that's really important to kind of recognize that it takes a minute, but it doesn't mean it can't happen. So part of what, I kind of already shared some of my passion. If you haven't, if you're just getting here, one of the reasons we wanted to do a training on for parents is because it's a big job. And we wanted this to be geared towards, all of you, all the professionals that I work with. We all work with families, and we don't just work with individuals. And those who are on the autism spectrum, there is more of a need for the parent involvement. My clients that I see as adults, typically, not always, but typically, I have some connection with the parent, a parent, because there's so much anxiety on making steps forward that sometimes having somebody else to say, well, how would you guide us? That kind of thing is also being done. So it's not that every individual is different, but at the same time, it's important. We just want them to be successful. There's just so many, they have, the individuals I have known are remarkable, have a lot of just strengths that I'm excited to see how they'll unfold in their lives. But at the same time, there's a lot of internal angst, other issues because of their history. Sometimes because having autism is traumatic and it's not because of it in itself is traumatic, but because how people respond to them is traumatic. And so sometimes there can be some hesitancy to try new things for a variety of reasons. So we want focus here is to gain a vision for and help parents, so that you can help parents, and those of you who are parents, to gain a vision of how to see a child and to think of the future. I've said this before, I'm sure, but I always think of my mom, because my mom said when I was a kid, she'd say, my goal is to make you a productive adult. Well, I didn't even, of course, I had no idea what that meant, but I'm grateful that in her mind, she was thinking of things. And so sometimes in our culture, it's really important for us, we are very busy. Our schedules are very full. And so sometimes it's easier as parents to just take care of whatever the problem is, instead of letting some things like to teach that responsibility. The last training I did was on adolescence, but this one is not really geared just to adolescents. It has a lot to do with it, but really, preparing for adulthood begins when you have a toddler and you are teaching them to put their toys away. Not saying that's an easy task, but at the same time, there's times that you have to you have to just take care of things. But when you're teaching them, we put things away, you're teaching them responsibility for themselves. It's not the same as getting a job, but it does begin with those little things, because we all know that when they don't learn that, then they think that it really is your job. I had many clients that I said, oh, I didn't know you were Princess so-and-so or Prince so-and-so, because their parents really didn't teach them that they are a responsibility for what they have. With autism, it's hard enough to grow up as an adult to an adulthood in this day and age. There's just a lot of challenges even that we didn't have to face. But with autism, there is special challenges because they're just because of their developmental issues that are going on and how they interact with the world. So part of what we're going to talk about today is this brain development. So these are just some things I've known for a long time. I referenced someone in case you want, just for information. But when the brain, what is known is that the gray matter doubles on this onset of puberty. So in the beginning, when you might actually have either your own children or other children that were, when they're 10, they could be a certain way, they could be neat, they could have some really good skills, and then, or, be compliant, or just, do things pretty independently. And then at some point when they hit puberty, it looks like they go backwards. Well, it kind of is true, because that's the gray matter, as it doubles, there's a lot of potential and there's a lot of growth that happens, but it also means that sometimes that's why they're not coordinated as well. Their brains are just doing a lot of work, which is, part of the reason why they do like to sleep more. They do like to, they're learning new things. There is a riskiness. So often just in general with autism, adolescents, but just recognizing, the things that we're going to be talking about is that the change in parenting really is that when you have a 5-year-old, you basically tell them what to do. I mean, you might give them a choice. You want to wear the red sweater or the green one, but at the same time, you're pretty much controlling their situation, and that's appropriate. They're not at the age to handle big decisions, but when it comes to that the onset of puberty, that brain part of them is starting to grow, is that prefrontal cortex. And so it's not to say that parents aren't still like involved. It's like what they need to be is more, instead of like, I am going to tell you what to do, is more like, how do we walk side by side? How can I show you? Now, of course, their authority overrides anything of the kid if it's not needed. But at the same time, it's important teaching the child how to think, because that will take them into their future. And that's really learning to be a co-decision maker is really a goal, which is a challenging one for most parents, especially if you were super cool with being a parent of a 5-year-old, of little kids, where you just you were doing real good at that. It does change, and it is a challenge, and even with autism. So even though a child with autism goes, how would I say, they're delayed, and maybe someone would say, oh, they're not as mature as someone most people their age. Even though that's true, it doesn't mean puberty is not happening and that they're not going to have those kind of decisions and questions. It just means that they need more protection to know, like, to learn, and it's going to take them maybe a little longer to learn certain things. But it's important to kind of pull away from because I said so, and more into like, how do we work into choices? And some details we'll talk about in a little bit. So, part of this learning is recognizing, this is a time where children are growing up, and I like to think strategically. It's of actually thinking where do they when you think of a child, where do they need to grow? Now, that isn't like, this is where, so that it's overwhelming, but it helps you to recognize, well, they struggle with this for their age, or they struggle with this. And that's really helpful, because then it can help you to kind of set, well, maybe we need to set some small goals to kind of help improve in those areas. Not a bunch of goals, because that will overwhelm a parent and a child at that time. But it's also the other side of it, which is the emotional challenges that come to a parent because of these changes that are happening. So often we focus on the child, but often the parenting part of, especially someone who has autism, is so demanding that it's hard to really, it's really important to take a pause to recognize that challenge. And so this is where, like, this is like super part of what why I was interested in doing this challenge, this training, is because I want parents to understand the importance of taking care of themselves. That is so often neglected, especially for those who have children, that autistic children. It's important to recognize the importance of self-care. In some ways, it also teaches the children, whether they have autism or not, that the parent is a person, not just their mom or dad. And so it's important to kind of, I'm not saying that's easy always, because the childcare is a thing, and there's multiple layers that goes on. But but for some parents, it's like not even intention to, it's almost like we're just dived in deep and we don't think about us. It's like almost like it's a shameful thing to think about taking care of ourselves. And that's really not healthy. It's not a good long-term plan. So it's kind of helping parents. And these are just things for those of you, as professionals, these are questions you can ask your client, your clients that you work with, the people that where to say, how does a parent, where do you have support? I don't know what your clients are like. I think I've asked Christina this, that most of the time it's that my clients will say, or the parents would say, I don't know any other parents who have kids who have autism. I don't know any other children but my own child that has autism. And that is where that isolation, any way we can kind of encourage them to connect, whether it's to someone they know, or a local group, or even on the internet, so that they can begin to recognize that some of their issues, every child is different, but just recognizing that kind of stress that they face is not alone.
I say,
yes.
I'm sorry. Are there, because that has come up a lot, support groups, just kind of where to start even looking for support groups. Some of them are just, some are parents of newly diagnosed autistic children. Some just are just lost. And I'm sorry, I'm looking for my pen. But yeah, are there any support groups locally? And then what's the best way to find them online?
My goal is to have more support groups in the next year, but I would say I would be looking online to autism local groups there's an autism of Tidewater, and Christine, do you have any that you have recommended your parents to?
I know that if you look online under My Active Child,
What is it?
It's called My Active Child Hampton Roads. You can actually, it breaks groups. It's for all children. And so you can break things down, and they do have some support groups on there. I also use the Autism Society of Tidewater, because they do have groups on there, and then you can kind of like sort it out through that. There are a couple in the area, but most of them are most of them are, I want to say, Virginia Beach and Chesapeake. There's not very many in Suffolk area that I've found.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Cool. Yes, I do feel like that's one of those areas that I feel like I want to have developed in the next year, because there is such a limited access, especially in our rural area, in Western Tidewater area is what I'm saying. And I think that addressing that parental shame, because I feel like not every parent is in this place, but sometimes because they have a child on the autism spectrum, there is a sense of like that there's something wrong, like they did something. There's some factor that they contributed to that, which is more of just helping them process through that typically isn't the reason. It's just, but sometimes that's what society, we just live in a very at times shame-based, and we focus on, oh, if this happened to your child, why? And it's important just to kind of support parents to recognize that it's okay to have that things are difficult. Like the difficulty isn't always because you did something wrong. And just kind of processing that. It's important to see how we can help them to move forward in their future. And this really is that these are caring for themselves, even taking, a few minutes to do things that they like, taking exercising, eating well, taking care of their own mental health is a great way of preventing a crisis. Because if we don't pause now, then it's really much more difficult when there is a crisis. And it's also recognizing that sometimes our I've said this before in trainings, that sometimes under my observation of those who families that have autism, or a family member that has autism, is typically that there is some families, it's just like, wow, we just adjust and we just kind of move forward, and it's really not a crisis. I mean, there's maybe crisis moments, but there isn't a crisis. It's not like all the time because my child has autism. But then there are other families where it really is the focus. It is like a crisis all the time. And that has less to do with the autism, although it could be severe autism, can cause a challenge. It has more to do with the support and the way the family dynamics are. And so it's important to recognize that if a child, a parent's wrapped up in a child's success when they have autism, then sometimes their decisions about how they support them to kind of in their growing up is going to be challenged, because they see that as a reflection of themselves. If their child's like fails a class or has difficulty in something, it's a normal thing for parents to want. I think that's a reflection on me, but it's important to challenge that, because it isn't the case. Every kid, all of us grew up, and all of us had to go through our own challenges of figuring things out and to be who we are today. And it's the same thing with someone who's on the autism spectrum. It just may look a little different than what it did for us. So when I'm thinking of independence and growth, these are things I encourage you to challenge, like the parents on your caseload. So again, like I mentioned, puberty begins independence. So when you start, and it's really is, research backs this up, that it's more when you start to notice the body changes is when puberty is beginning. Even if it's not like dramatic, it's how the body is changing that begins that independence. So just kind of noticing those things. So understanding what was going on in the brain, and helping parents understand that, and the more you understand what is like, that these are changes that are normal, and even though the child can be very immature with autism, more immature than maybe, like I say, typical 12-year-old and an autistic 12-year-old, typically a neurotypical 12-year-old will act a bit more mature, but that doesn't mean that things aren't happening with the autistic child. And it's important to kind of recognize that. And like I mentioned, there's the family stuff that I just mentioned, and then there's the fear, addressing fear. There's nothing like, this, just like the parents in the first video that I played, there is a sense of fear. There's a sense of the unknown, and what does this mean? And adolescence in itself with a neurotypical child, it brings up some anxiety for parents, but it's important to recognize and kind of like acknowledge it, acknowledge what's happening. Acknowledge the changes, and that we don't always know how this unfolds, but we will do our best to be intentional, to be successful. And the more we talk about, the more it's not, a dark room, it's more like a lit room. So here's something I just found, and I just thought this, he's just talks about the brain, and sometimes not just hearing me say there's brain stuff happening is helpful. So I just thought I'd play this for you.
Being a teenager is hard, and so is living with one, I'm told. No human gets to escape this moody, angsty, confusing phase, and interestingly, such an extended adolescence is unique to humans. Other animals grow up a lot faster than we do. And you may think our teen years are just about streamlining bodies for baby making, but as it turns out, the storms of sex hormones that we associate with the teenage years are only a small part of what's really going on in the teenage body. Most of the action, it turns out, is happening in the brain. Until fairly recently, we thought that the brain finished the nuts and bolts of its development by the time we started kindergarten. But really, right as puberty rolls in, it undergoes massive remodeling. This amounts to several years of neural growing pains, as well as the other more visible growth that's going on all over your body. So take heart, whether you're going through it now, or about to go through it, or count yourself among the veterans of that turbulent decade. Know that the result of the teen years is a stronger, faster, more sophisticated brain. Because someone had told me that 20 years ago. Let's start with that obvious scapegoat of adolescent anguish, hormones. That word itself is kind of a lazy shorthand that people use to describe the chemicals that some of our glands excrete that can affect our behavior. But the fact is, hormones have all kinds of jobs that have nothing to do with where you grow hair, or what turns you on, or whether you feel glum for no apparent reason. Hormones keep your heart beating and your body hydrated, and they make your organs grow and make you grow bone and muscle and skin. What people actually mean when they talk about teenage hormones are sex hormones. And yes, puberty involves a whole series of sex hormone storms, the first of which actually kicks in before you're out of primary school. That's when the adrenal glands start secreting androgens, which trigger the growth and activity of the skin's sebaceous glands, making skin more oily. Soon enough, more apocrine or sweat glands get activated, increasing body odor. Then comes the wave of hormonal agents that start activating the gonads. For boys, this influx of luteinizing hormones from the pituitary gland get testosterone brewing in the testes, and suddenly, that guy has up to 50 times more testosterone than he did before puberty. This also changes the shape of the male body, promoting hair growth and building up lean muscle mass, just as the increased presence of estrogen in girls rearranges the deposition of their fat, stimulating the growth of breasts. Humans are actually lucky to experience the craziness of puberty only once. Many other animals undergo multiple similarly intense hormonal rodeos as they enter sexually active periods, sometimes called the rut or heat, every new breeding season. Some male species completely stop eating during their breeding period because they're just that sex crazed. And yet, all that said, teen teens are far less ruled than their hormones than you might think. There are other factors at play here. For example, your favorite moody teen may be by turns punchy, angry, depressed, or in a zombie-like fog because of their chronic lack of sleep. Sleep is vital to everyone, but it's especially important for kids and teens because it's during sleep that your pituitary gland releases an essential growth hormone necessary for development. A normal sleep cycle driven by circadian rhythm is regulated by the daytime release of cortisol, which helps you wake up, and melatonin, which helps you wind down when it gets dark. But this biology of sleep timing changes as we age, and as puberty begins, teens' sleep clocks get pushed back. Most adults start oozing melatonin around 10 p.m.-ish, but one study showed that teenagers don't start producing melatonin until closer to 1 a.m. This may be because puberty's hormonal frenzy is stalling the release of melatonin, and could partly explain why so many teens stay up late, energized by the night, but have a really hard time rolling out of bed with the alarm. Of course, it's a bit of a chicken and egg deal, since watching reruns of The Simpsons and playing Call of Duty late into the night continues to stimulate the brain, which may further delay the release of melatonin. Still, some researchers are starting to advocate for pushing back high school start times in the morning in the hopes of having more focused students. So we got sex hormones changing the bodies and a lack of sleep to contend with, but increasing evidence suggests that there is something much bigger at work that's making teenagers so teenagery. Their brains. It turns out that brains actually take longer than we thought to fully mature. I don't mean physical size. Our brains are already about 95% full size by the time we're just 6, but more in the sense of the connections inside the brain. Adults, for the most part, know how to make decisions by evaluating choices and weighing consequences. They do this with their prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for controlling impulses and emotions and forming judgments. Its neurons chat with the neurons in other regions of the brain responsible for, say, memory or movement through synapses. Thing is, teenage brains don't quite work like this yet. The prefrontal cortex may not be fully developed until your mid-20s, and teen synapses, those lines of communication, are still growing and specializing. They're also slow. As an adolescent brain keeps developing, its axons, the long tail-like parts of the neurons that transmit signals to other neurons, become more and more insulated by a fatty layer called the myelin sheath. This padding greatly increases the cell's transmission speed, and while it helps adults make faster decisions, it isn't fully formed in teens. These changes occur slowly, beginning at the back of the brain, where the oldest and most fundamental brain parts reside, and slowly working its way forward to the more advanced and complicated brain bits. The prefrontal cortex is the last to be hooked up and shaped. So it's important to keep in mind that just because your favorite teenagers stayed up until sunrise binge-watching The Walking Dead the night before an exam, it doesn't mean they're dumb or lazy. Their brains are just literally finishing being built. But at the same time, because all this brain building is just starting to peak, this is also when the brain starts getting thinned out. You actually start losing connections that you don't use enough in a process called synaptic pruning, which has led to a theory that this is kind of a use it or lose it phase. Meaning, adolescence could be an especially important time to use your brain. Play an instrument, engage in sports, write poetry, learn a language. Because by doing these things, you're helping hardwire those synapses and giving your brain topiary a lovely, lasting shape. Whereas, if you're sitting around all day playing Candy Crush, those will be the connections that survive, which you don't need. This shaping of the teen brain manifests itself in other ways too, like in teenage attitudes. A group of scientists at the McLean Hospital in Massachusetts once hooked up a group of adults and a group of teens to MRI devices and then asked them to identify a series of expressions on photographs of adult faces. Interestingly, while adults correctly identified one expression as fear, the teenagers thought the faces showed anger, surprise, or shock. They weren't registering subtlety as well. Not only that, but the MRI images showed that adults and teens responded with different parts of their brains. Adults used the reasonable prefrontal cortex, while the teens mostly used the gut reaction emotional amygdala, located farther back in the brain. Results like these might help explain why teenagers seem to experience frequent mood swings. For one, they tend to react quickly from the emotional part of their brain without running those reactions by the more rational frontal cortex, and two, it could be that they're just misreading expressions and therefore the intentions behind them. The frontal cortex also helps people relate to and understand each other, and you can imagine what happens when concern is misjudged as anger or worry as disappointment. The Fresh Prince has an entire song about it. But the truth is, as much as parents just don't understand, teens don't always understand either. When the emotional amygdala and the more rational cortex aren't fully hooked up yet, that can make it hard for teenagers to productively work through emotions. This kind of reactionary, impulsive behavior may also lead to more risk-taking. Adolescence is the time when we're most likely mostly to experiment with whatever booze, drugs, or toad licking is available, and unfortunately, it's also the time our developing brains are most vulnerable to lasting effects. Studies have shown that teens are more likely to become addicted to drugs and alcohol than adults, partly because their brains are more attuned to their reward centers. While the teenage prefrontal cortex is still developing, their nucleus accumbens, or pleasure and reward zone, forms early on. Neuroimaging studies have shown that when presented with a big potential reward, teen brains light up way more than kids' or adults' brains. But if the reward was small, teen brains hardly fired at all. So basically, give an adolescent a pat on the back, and you'll get a shrug. Give them a hot date or a winning goal, and their brains light up like Vegas. This, of course, does not always result in great judgment. A jacked-up, thrill-seeking impulse combined with an exquisite pang of peer pressure, plus a new driver's license, new sex parts, and access to substances can lead to some not good results. But still, this long and sometimes tedious remodeling process that our bodies go through in the teenage years isn't all bad. Many scientists have pointed out that our delayed adolescence lets our brains keep their flexibility longer, which, yeah, may make teens a little slow, but also more adaptable as they prepare for the adult world. In this way, you can see teen impulsiveness as boldness or independent thinking, and moodiness as a source of newfound empathy, and excitability as passion. Which means there's a lot of awesome energy floating around out there ready to decrease all kinds of world suck. Thanks for watching this SciShow Infusion, and thanks especially to all of our subscribers on Subbable who make this channel possible.
So that is not the cadence you would use for someone talking to people with autism, but I thought he had a lot of really good information. Although he is not talking about autism, it is what every person goes through when they go through when they hit puberty, and what their brain goes through. And I think it's important to recognize that, because sometimes that will help parents to recognize that there's a lot going on that is legit. You know, there's a lot of things that are happening that we can help guide them, and it's really an important time. So any questions on that material, or was it any reactions to that? It just, please share what you're thinking, because that was a lot. And sometimes we need to hear it again, because we're not scientists. We're not studying this. Well, maybe you are, but I am not. So like, that's important to like look at those things and hear them regularly, because it kind of changes the way we see when the oddities or the behaviors. And even though those who are autistic still go through that, it may be delayed a little. It might look a little different. But it's important for parents to recognize where they see the changes, not only just physically, but in terms of maybe if there's more resistance, if there's more how they're talking to their parents. I years ago heard the brain development training for adolescents, and the speaker, I always remember this because the speaker started with, "Good news, my 20-year-old realizes I'm smart." And it was that reality that, there is a point in time when in teenage years where, parents are really stupid in their child's eyes, and they just you don't get it. And so part of that is normal growth. And so part of it, and even though, and I would just say that it's just takes a little bit longer for those who are the autistic individuals walking through that. So here I am in another video. It looks like all I'm doing is showing you videos, but really I'm going to show you part of this. If you were in my last training, I introduced you to Hunter. He is an autistic individual. He has, and so he has a lot of dynamic. I was so excited to find a autistic male who is dynamic in his speaking, not just, and so sometimes that's not always easy to find. So let me just pull this in. And this is really kind of information. Again, this first part of this training, I'm really focusing on, and sometimes it's an overlooked issue of being a parent who has autistic children, and how often it can be focused on the child. And sometimes we need to be aware of our own issues that can kind of, if we don't process them, they can get in the way of us letting our children move forward, letting our children take steps to do new things, or challenging them when they don't want to be challenged in that way. So he has a lot to say. I'm not using the whole video. I'm just using a part of it. So that's why. So once he starts to talk, I'll put it where I
Hey,
need
welcome back to The Life Autistic. Real quick, if you are not an autism mom, then please be sure to stick around for this video either way. We've got a lot to cover, but child's autistic experience. Now hang on, don't quit on me yet. I understand that it's really easy to focus in on the struggles, the challenges, the difficulties, and you want to tell it because you're the one telling the story. But when it's your story as an autism mom, when you're not autistic, it's less about autism. And at that point, the line between advocacy for autism and just sharing your experience with it gets really blurry and gets really difficult. So I would encourage you to be mindful of what's the story all about. I love hearing from many autism moms about, hey, the challenges, the quirks, but also the joys and the victories. I love hearing the names of your kids. And I feel like you are helping carry a message that they can't, and I don't feel like you're the main character in their story. That is hard, and I get that. I get that you need the kind of validation and you need the support, and those are fine things to seek. But remember, if you're in this autism mom gig, you have a huge responsibility, a challenge, but also a gift to really be that voice and advocate for where your kid can't be. They're the main character in this, and you can be a really great supporting character for them or an awesome narrator. Just be mindful of who's the main in this narrative here. This one's a big do. So number 8, take care of yourself. We in our autistic experience, we'll manage. You're gonna help us. But look, for you autism moms, autism parents, take care of yourself. You are in for it. I was a difficult child. I still am. And I'm not gonna hide behind my autism to, paper over the fact that I could be very challenging. I'm strong-willed. I argued with my parents all the time. Sorry, Dad. But I was right about that one thing, Be sure that you don't let yourself drown in the challenges. You do deserve a break. You deserve a coffee. You deserve to read a book and replenish and recharge. There is absolutely no shame with it. Because look, let me tell you, I'm not an autism parent, but I was an autistic kid. And my parents had their hands full with just me alone. And they had 5 of us. And I may have been as difficult as the other 4 combined. Oh well. Don't forget to take care of yourself. You kind of need it. Because we as autistic kids, we need you. Promise I won't be mean on this one, but number 9, big don't be exploitative. When it comes to meltdowns and fits and some harmful stims, it's not kind. In fact, it's very unkind. You can just tell us that it's challenging. You can seek support that way, but please don't expose us, your autistic children, at our absolute worst, especially when we have no agency or consent in it. So I would be very, very careful about what you're recording and sharing with the world. My mom would never have done this, and I'm glad, because I would not be very happy with her if I were to go watch those and check the Facebook groups of old and see Hunter crying his head off in the mall. Who does that help? It doesn't help anybody. I don't want to be shown at my worst as an autistic adult, and you don't want to be shown at your worst as an autism mom or as a human being. Please, if you need to convey how difficult it is, find another way than shaming us on a video. So yeah, please don't do that. Don't. Just don't, okay? Don't. Wow, are you still here? If so, I'm so glad. You autism moms can be our heroes and champions. So number 10 is basically that. Do be our advocate. Be our defender. Some of the guidance that I give to autism moms and parents is to just be their child's fiercest advocate and defender. You may have to be the bad guy and tell relatives no, and protect our time, and tell folks that it's not good, or keep harmful things away, or, unexpected invites, cutting back on surprises. You have no idea how much that helps. Again, you are going to be the closest in our circle and our first line of defense, and you can really help build an environment for us to thrive and really bring us along in experiences that we can handle, rather than being bombarded by surprise visits, people who want to see us do things where, frankly, I didn't always want to be happy and social as a kid. You get to be that champion, that hero, that staunch defender. You can embrace that with both hands. Please do that. Look, I actually do have a list here. So number 11 is a don't. Don't compare. Don't compare yourself to other parents in your situation, especially not to other neurotypical parents, other parents with a different set of challenges, autistic kids with different levels of needs. In fact, I'm going to say this. Don't compare even to me. Your child may not grow up and be independent and own a home, get married, have a family, and do a silly YouTube channel. That may not happen. My hope is that they do way better than me, and make an even better YouTube channel, get a bigger house, better job, and all that. But I'm well aware of the fact that it's very different. Your experience may be staggeringly different, but please don't feel deficient. But also don't feel proficient, like you've got it made and others don't. And if you do feel that way, that's a call for you to help too. So again, my best advice, just even from regular normal humans, comparison truly is the thief of joy. Seek to help, seek to serve. Don't compare how you're doing with how somebody else is doing. You don't have the ledger. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I don't. So please, do the best with what you have and for what your autistic child needs. They don't need you to get ruined by a comparison. All right, so we're on 12. 12 is a do. Do try to make an attempt to understand what's going on with your child. As a youngster, I was hyperlexic, hyperverbal. I just talked too much. I could tell you what was going on in most cases. I am aware that you can be autistic and have a very different range of communication levels. That shouldn't stop you from trying. I have a wonderful 2-year-old. I don't even know what she's up to half the time. And I feel like I'm fumbling with a switchboard, trying to get the right combination of things that make her happy or keep her from being unhappy. You are not just your child's parent, but you're also a good student of what they are. And in some ways, they're going to teach you just through routines, through patterns, through environments. Make that attempt. Do try to understand the sequences. You'll find things that work. They may not work the next day. You'll find the patterns and routines that make them feel most comfortable. And you're really going to benefit from it just as a parent, because it's going to make life easier. It's also going to make your child's life a whole lot happier when you understand or seek to understand and find the patterns and things that really make or break their day. 13, don't try to prove how hard you work. This is not a race to the bottom or a competition as an autism mom or an autism parent who can suffer the most, who can endure the most grief, who can broadcast in the most elegant lighting, who's had the worst day. We know being autistic is difficult enough. Being a child is difficult enough. Being an autistic child, that's a double whammy. It's not without its challenges. We know that you're going to need encouragement, but like we said in earlier points, right? The narrative isn't about you. Yes, it's okay to seek support, but don't try to prove either to yourself or to others how hard you work, how much more difficult it is. That's only going to lead to this self-defeating prophecy to where if you can't prove it to yourself and you're trying to validate with others, you're losing sight of the battle. You're losing sight of the victory. And I don't want you as autism moms and autism parents to lose sight of what's important. We know you are working hard for us. We just want you to work smart and work the right way. It's okay to take an L some days. That's fine, but please, that's not what the show's about. Okay, so 14, probably the biggest do. If you're an autism mom, literally have to straighten this. It's this perfectionism. Oh, I'm still working. All right, if you're an autism mom, one thing you should definitely do, find autistic autism moms. Yes, these are going to be much better advocates and understanders of your experience more so than me. So if you stop watching and go find others in this group, cool, no hard feelings. Because with autistic autism moms, you get people who understand what it is to be the mother of an autistic child, but you also couple that with a unique voice of somebody who has been a mom and also can communicate what autism is like. I'm really glad you're watching, but frankly, if you want really great parenting advice, find those autistic autism moms out there or autistic autism dads. Listen to them and hear what they have to say, because they've got all the bases covered, more so than I do. The 15th and final don't give up. Don't give up. I know that in the literal sense, you're not literally going to give up and give us away. Don't give up, even on a day-to-day basis. I wasn't the easiest child. And mom, if you're watching, which I'm kind of glad you are, be sure you subscribe if you haven't, by the way. But I'm glad you didn't give up on me. I'm really glad. I didn't think I would enjoy as good of a life. No offense, I thought I'd still be living with you at this age. I didn't know I'd get married one day and, have kids and have a house. decent house too. I mean, yeah, I could redo this paint here and have a job and live independently. I don't know if you saw that when I was wilding out in the mall at age 3, but I'm glad you didn't give up on my future and being hopeful and trying to understand me better. And for my other autism mamas out there, don't give up on your kids either, okay? We're autistic. That's just who we are. You can be the best thing for us, but you can't give up on us. Don't give up on your hopes. Don't give up on finding even more and more wins. I didn't see me doing this when I was a youngster. In fact, I didn't see me doing this like 2 years ago. But hey, here we are. So that's my last bit. It's a big, final, emphatic don't. Don't give up. That's all I have for today. Thanks so much for checking out this episode.
So I hope that was encouraging. I know that when you're talking to parents, it's important to kind of recognize those issues. And I thought it was just better coming from somebody who is actually autistic themselves. So we are taking a moment of break. Let's see, it's almost 10. So I'm going to say we have a break for 10 minutes. I'll come back at 10 after 10. And we'll continue from there. Thank you so much. Hey, everyone. Let's get back to it. Okay. See it here. Okay. So now we're getting into the more practical part. I wanted to build a foundation in terms of really recognizing how people are affected by their children changing. But now we're working into the practical pieces of preparing. So there's a lot of little pieces here. When I was reviewing this and going over it again, I really was thinking of those who are case managers and working more hands-on with clients in outpatient therapy and other ways of helping autistic individuals mature and be successful. These are good things to think about in terms of if you're doing a treatment plan that you could be using. So part of it, so Christina, when you're looking at this in terms of encouraging them to have appropriate expectations or unique and enjoying their child, what kind of things have you encouraged your clients to do?
I often encourage my clients' parents to talk to their kids and see what they actually want to do, and that assess like what they can do and what they want to do. I also encourage them to try new things because you never know if they say they don't like it, but they actually might like going out there and trying those activities versus being at home. I also try to keep them routine so that they can have the ability to try other things.
That's good. What I have learned over the years is exactly that sometimes there's a balance between being overstuck and trying to encourage them to do new things and encouraging. And sometimes kids don't know what they like. And sometimes it can be just that exposure to something new. And maybe not like that they're deciding to go into a new like they're going to join karate or they're going to do something big commitment wise, but just even exposing them to like horses can be an experience. Exposing them to different environments, like going to the aquarium or going to different places where people work, can always be a way of exposing them to show them new things. I even just bought a new book. It's by Temple Grade. And if you don't know Temple, she's a good friend. I said it humorously. She is she's in her 70s and has autism, autistic individual and she's has a PhD in animal science because of how she observed the world and how it changed. It was revolutionary. So she has this cool being book. It's called Calling All Minds: How to Think and Create Like an Inventor. So this book is super cool. It's just very I find it very fun because it has a lot of just real practical stories about people, as well as like hands-on activities that they can do, making paper, handmade paper. Haven't done it yet. And just kind of can encourage exploration. she has another book that she wrote that I'm also probably more interested in even more, is about how to be an outdoors explorer. So these are skills that are, most autistic individuals typically have a keen observation skills. And so sometimes including them to say, well, what I wonder what it'd be like to be an investigator and to help them find things, looking for things. Again, it doesn't have to be something that you're doing that's like, we're joining gymnastics, which might be very helpful. But at the same time, it may be that you just say, we're going to pick an activity once a month to do something new that says, I wonder if you would enjoy this. You super much enjoy science. So I wonder if you would enjoy if we did something different and actually tried something. So that's just such a suggestion. I don't know if you see it the right way or the wrong way, but it's called Calling All Minds by Temple Grandin. And I just got it off of Amazon. I'm trying to encourage just different materials that can be helpful for children and adults and adolescents to kind of like explore, just as we learn in the brain development part, that this is the time. And even when they're younger than adolescents, it's the time to really kind of say, well, what do you like? Do you enjoy music? Do you enjoy science, or are you a reader? Well, then what do you enjoy? Do you like to write? What do you like computers? My question to the lady who was talking in the first video, she was talking about her child liking, maybe he would like to be a computer scientist. So, and she's like, well, I guess that can make people feel happier. And all in my mind, I was like, what? Because the way she was talking about, like he was going to be writing programs for computer games. And I thought, there's a whole world out there that has something more to do with a computer programmer who is focused. A lot can happen. And you'll learn of one in further in our training today that I will introduce you to. So anyways, but that I just wanted to kind of bring that out as an option, is to recognize that there's way more out there that we can. And it's kind of the fun part. I find that with children, like especially older elementary school, middle school, I mean, this is a time to kind of open up in general, and they can kind of say, you're good at this. And sometimes, when life is really hard, recognizing that your child, for the children have, where they do have strengths, where are their strengths? I have someone I recently got who is in her late teens, and she just was diagnosed with autism this year. And when in our first session, I just said to her, I know you got strengths. And she was telling me about some things about autism. And I said, you're a researcher. And she beamed. I recognized that she had been doing research, and that she, what she's really good at. And I think so often we focus on what is wrong, what is difficult, where the challenges are, and not to minimize them, but sometimes like everybody else, they just need to know they do some things well. And I think that our motivation changes when we recognize, well, I actually do well in this. So that's what my suggestion are. It's good to think about. Spoke of this in my last training, and it's important to recognize, kids, again, when the brain is growing and when we're children, but even as adults, it's easy to get stuck. And I find that those who are on my autistic clients have more difficulty asking for help than most people. That's just been my experience. I'm not saying that I did a research study on it, but just my experience is that in their world, when they're trying to problem solve something, they don't think outside. Well, I wonder what my mom would say. I wonder what Aunt Jenny is really good at this. I wonder if I could ask her for some help. And that's really what you want to continue to train, to expose children to kind of be thinking about, like, who else is there? So beyond like a parent and having themselves, it's like, is there other family members? Are there friends or neighbors that are helpful? And it doesn't mean that they have to know everything. It just means in this area, this coach is really good about helping Johnny keep going, even though when he gets frustrated. All those people are important to think of. And again, if you're in the role as a professional to help a family, these are things to make sure you're pointing and asking, and actually challenging parents to actually do it, actually to say, can I asking for help? Because sometimes, again, parents can be isolative, and so can the client themselves as they, in their own life. So you want to encourage this regularly. Who are you asking for help? And friends might seem like a fun, well, that's the problem with teenagers. They always just want to ask their friends. Well, not necessarily autistic children. They don't necessarily the autistic individuals don't typically have friends developing the way that I did when I was an adolescent. And so it's more of like how to encourage that relationship in that way, and for them to learn, wow, that person may know more about science. I wonder if I could ask them some questions, etc. So part of it is also then how do we set realistic goals? Again, I'm giving you a whole lot of information, and it's really not it's kind of like, put it like in a basket and then take some things out when it's as necessary. It's important to recognize these are just some questions that I have that I would encourage you to ask, to kind of be aware of, take a picture of this and look at it later. But recognizing that, making realistic goals, it's a step at a time. Is there a life goal? Like, say, for instance, the person's interested in science, how would you encourage that to grow? Where is their curiosity? As you see, I spelled there wrong, but that's okay. Where's the curiosity? What gets them excited, even if it's just a little bit excited, and it's one of the things that Temple Grandin says often is, video games aren't bad, but watch that you keep, just like children can easily can become addicted to them, and that keeps them from focusing on things that are really going to go make them move forward. So I think really having those limits is very important. But it's also what are their special interests? Everyone that has autism typically has, it can change over the years, a special interest, something they're very good at, or an area of that they're actually a science, a subject matter. In my research, I've learned that girls with autism typically have, or women, I should say, typically have interests that are more mainstream. They're not as odd and as sometimes as the guys are. And so that's also probably why maybe they're not always diagnosed right away. There's other reasons too, which I can talk about at some point. But that's one of those things to recognize, if that's an interest of theirs. Sometimes we just say, no, you shouldn't be interested in something, but that's just the way they're made. And so encouraging them to grow in that area of interest, if they like rocket science, if they like, they like dinosaurs, they like, mechanical things, if they like animals, whatever it is, how to encourage that, getting them books, exposing them to going to the zoo or wherever, showing them, finding YouTube videos that have something to do with that topic that they enjoy. These are ways to kind of encourage, like, oh my goodness, their brain will explode in a good way. And because you want them, the more they can take interest in that, that's how you're going to motivate them to like go, oh, wow, I can move forward in this. Encourage them to talk to, relative, people that they're connected to that may have an interest in that way. It's actually, again, to trying new things, also the setting a timeline. So it could be, I'm giving you some just ideas. It could be as simple as saying, once a month, we'll talk about, we'll do something different. It can say, I know you have an interest in horses, so we're just going to go, I wonder what that looks like. Let's set up in the next couple months, we'll do these certain things. And because that encourages them to know, oh, you understand me, that you want me to understand more about this topic. And it can also just be that you set realistic goals. It's not, you're going to be proficient by, the end of the year. It's really about like, how do we start those? Like one thing we're going to do. What is one thing we can do in this area that would bring everybody joy, that would actually be a way of like exposing and opening new doors. And also, are there some plans that they can actually have, on their own. So as they get older, it's important for them to kind of not just depend on what should I do next, but really to kind of say, I would really like this. What I've learned about autistic individuals is typically they are more visual, and they're more hands-on, typically. And I'm not saying all, but so if there's more of if there is more of a visual need, that it's not watching how much you're talking to them, because that may be actually like an impediment to an obstacle for them to move forward. If you need to draw it out, help them have pictures, help them have a calendar, different things. They can say, well, what would you like to do? What is our goal? And let's put it down on something. Those little things that sound like, well, I don't understand what if I'm saying it to them, why can't they write it down? Or if I'm saying it, I'm describing it. Well, because their brain works differently. They may benefit from having it where there's pictures, there's something that's realistic, even when they know how to read. It's ways to motivate. So I went over this the last time, or actually Christina did the last time. And this is, I feel like a main issue that is important to bring up, because those who are on the spectrum typically have a hard time seeing the end goal and being motivated by the end goal. Christine, can you explain more about the sandwich? Although it looks like a good one.
It does. So the sandwich, we have individuals that they have a goal and they know what the end goal is, but they don't know how to get there. They know what they want to achieve. So the thought of the sandwich is taking it apart one by one and showing them. So you tell them, okay, the first step would be like the bread, and then it would be the condiments, and then it would be the ingredients. And that's helping them build the sandwich, because they have the idea and they have what the goal is going to look like. But how are we getting there? They don't know the in between. So the sandwich effect is kind of teaching them how to get from A to B step by step, instead of just saying, oh, you have A and now you have B, so get there. So that's how I kind of teach my clients their goals, is kind of step by step versus A and then B.
Thank you. I love this idea, because it goes back to what I've said before about making the covert overt, because it is very important to not assume that even if you're making a sandwich, we'll go make a sandwich, that you know what I'm talking about. That can also, when you get the blank stare, when there's what seems like resistance, might be that this is too much. It's kind of like the same way when those of you have used any kind of behavioral modification or that's more rewards and consequences. And I've certainly had parents who would say that didn't work when I gave rewards or and really usually it doesn't work because it's not connected appropriately. So typically when the goals are too big, the details aren't clear enough, and that sort of thing. In the same way, if we look at it as, if this is an issue, then maybe it just needs to be broken down more. And then maybe they need guidance, that they're actually with you when they're doing the first time, or you do it the first time and you show them. You just think of something like making a phone call. The first time you had to make a phone call to a professional, to a doctor's office, that's not an easy thing when you're growing up, when you're learning to do that the first time. It's even more difficult if you have autism. But it can be that they watch you write it down, and then you help them. Then the next time you have them do it, but you're right there so that you could take the phone, or these little steps can help them to feel comfortable. They can write it out. And that's often why sometimes texting helps them, although we want them to be able to understand how to actually use the phone. But that's just a way of kind of, step by step. And I would just say that in general, when you're working with parents and they're frustrated because their child is not completing a task or not as they expected, even though they yell or they get consequences, is to kind of recognize, to encourage the parent to see, how much are you breaking it down? How much are you making it like detailed? Because typically that's what they need, is the details of, how do I do this, so that they can execute it the way you're thinking they should. So it's important. I feel like when you're working with children and adolescents with autism, actually, it's kind of like this balance. There's like this balancing between when to protect and when to support and push change. And so your goal is, the goal of a parent is to never overwhelm or shame, but at the same and to evaluate and to encourage like goals and to have conversations about these, setting goals and hopes. What would you enjoy doing? But also recognizing what's appropriate in time. What is the next step, and recognizing that maybe they're not ready, and not pushing it too forward too quickly. And that is the protection is, as an adult, the adults in the family typically have more understanding of like, oh, you're not ready for this. It's kind of like, lots of 12 or 13-year-old, 14-year-olds are interested in driving. Well, it doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it like that's the time they should be starting to drive. It just means they have an interest. And that's a great conversation. You protect by not letting them drive, but you let them like sit in the seat or learn the traffic laws, learn how it works, and talk to them about how different it is to drive during the day and at night, and just have those conversations, which prepares us to learn how to drive, and when it's actually time to sit in the wheel and actually learn something. So again, making small goals, recognizing when there is a problem, when there is something's not moving forward and there's a lot of angst. Often it can be because the goal is too large or too general, and it needs to be more specific. Again, so when you see this, Christina, we were talking about teaching problem solving versus making decisions for them. We've kind of talked a little bit about that before, but Christina, what do you think about this topic?
I think that kids, especially the ones about to be 18, they lack the ability to problem solve. And so we often make their decisions for them up until about 18. And then at 18, we think magically that they're going to be able to make these decisions on their own and problem solve through, regular problems that we would normally face. So I think it's important that we teach the kids starting at probably 10 to 12, how to problem solve small things and evolve into bigger things, so that when they are considered adults, that they are able to make decisions rationally without having maybe a crisis, because it's such a big decision that they have to make, even if it isn't considered a big decision.
I'm just nodding my head. My experience has been that sometimes it's so much easier for parents to make the decisions for their children, especially autistic children who are probably a little bit more immature than their peers. Then it's like, oh, I'll just take care of this. I'll just take care of it. I know they like this. I know they do that. This will be okay for them. They might cry a little bit, but they'll be all right. It's really important for them. It's that time again to stop and help parents to recognize you're trying to teach your children to make choices. Everybody's all different. Some people make decisions really quick. Like it's easier for them to make decisions than other people. But I think at this age, it's important to really consider that it's important to not kind of hold back from making decisions for your kids. There are some things, of course, that the parents still take care of, and I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. The things that can be decided by them. Are you going to go do that activity? Is this, there's certain things that why you would say no, why you are concerned about an activity or a situation. That's important to talk through and to teach them responsibility, to teach them like why you would think that way, because that's how they learn. You're coming alongside them to say, for them to recognize, oh, that's why we would do that. Or it doesn't mean they're going to go, oh, you're wonderful and you're so smart and I'm so glad you're here for me. That doesn't happen very often. So, but it's more about asking them and helping them make a decision and see how they can do it. It's really important to watch where they're rescuing, where it can be, where parents want to rescue. I think that, parents who love and want their kids to be successful, that can be a real problem to when the child is not motivated to do their schoolwork, that sometimes parents will just feel like, I don't want you to fail, so I'll take care of it for you. Sometimes it's really okay for kids to fail. I mean, I'm not saying I want kids to, never graduate, or I'm not talking catastrophic thing, but I am saying that sometimes we rescue them, and that keeps a teacher from really knowing where your child struggles and where there's a difficulty. It's okay for parents to guide and help, but it's also important to let the child face difficulties, because we all need them to change and to grow. And again, how do we make smaller steps? So if they have a project, if they have something they have to do in school, it can be that they need smaller, to have like a checklist. And this is where an adult can help them to maybe to break it down smaller. Now, are they always going to be like, this is amazing? No, but at the same time, it's easier to gear them towards that than to say, go do your project. And then, of course, it's like a meltdown in that way. And it's kind of recognizing, where are they challenged? Is it, I have clients, and I think Christina has similar situations where, when certain issues come up, it's like a pattern to give up. And it's important to kind of help your children to feel like every step I take, if even trying something that I fail at and I don't pass, or I struggle with, is a way to move forward. It's a way to learn that I can do something. I don't have to be perfect to be okay. For some children on the spectrum, they really do struggle with an obsessive perfectionism, where they need to have everything perfect. And, them learning to tolerate the fact that, the paper doesn't look perfect, or it's a little crooked over here, is important to kind of recognize it's going to be okay. Sometimes we need to move on, and just kind of being compassionate while they're walking through that. Yes, preparation. Oops, sorry. Preparation begins now. So again, I say that, this is really geared towards every age, because, thinking of their future is really important. So we encourage parents to recognize the importance of their choices, to encourage responsibility and natural consequences. This is something really specific. Like when you think of the clients you work with, the people you work with, how do you encourage the parents to help their kids to take appropriate responsibilities and natural consequences? That is important to continually. It's of course different at different ages, but is that your language? Is that the language you use with your parents, that you want to encourage that responsibility? Christina, how about for you?
One of the questions I always have with my parents when I first start sessions with clients is to ask what consequences they have for behaviors, whether it be if they're, they're not doing what they're asked, or if they're just being disrespectful. What is the consequence? Because a lot of times they don't face consequences, and then at the end it's just setting them up to not know that in real life they're going to have it. So one of the big questions I always ask is, what is a consequence that the kids have? And I do encourage them to set things up and talk it down, and let the kids I encourage the kids to also be involved in making the consequence, so that they are aware that this is what's going to happen if they don't do what they're supposed to do.
Exactly. I typically what I tell parents is that with the actual consequences is to write it up, put it on a wall, have them involved with it, and evaluate it every once in a while, because sometimes it may not be that helpful, or maybe the responsibility needs to be tweaked how it's written. Because again, like a classic one is clean your, I tell them to clean their room and they don't. Well, 90% of children don't know what that means. And they're not, they don't have usually our cleanliness styles. So it's about, how is the bed made? Are there clothes on the floor? Is the toys put in the appropriate places? Is the garbage can emptied? They need specifics that can make them actually go, oh, okay, that's different. Because sometimes when their room looks like a hot mess, that's just too much overwhelming too. They'd rather get in trouble than to figure out, what do I do next? Because they don't, and they need support there. So the next thing I said was creating a vision board, which again is kind of using the idea of the sandwich breakdown which Christina explained, is a way of kind of helping them to own it. So this can be really fun. It can be something that's out there, and it can be where they can use pictures. You can have them draw things out. But the vision board is to really kind of show them what they want to do, like maybe in the next few months, maybe the next year, and then beyond, and it can go on. Because I think that seeing things again, autistic individuals and benefit from seeing things, and you can refer to, and that can be referred to in the house. That can be, the family can refer to and see what is there, and that can really be very effective. And they could change things. Well, I don't really like horses anymore, and pull it out, and that's the point. You can pull it out, and you could say, now I have interest in cars. That's great. It's not like this is like one and done. It's really about like we change, but seeing something can help us to have a goals, so that we're kind of breaking them down in terms of how we do it, and affects our routine. Setting up timelines. Christina, do you do anything with helping parents with calendars or timelines with their kids?
Yes, I encourage everybody to use a calendar. I feel like if you put it on the calendar, it lets them know what's coming up. It's not unexpected. We also talk about explaining to the child that some things do change. And so if a change is going to happen, this is what the change possibly could be. But I encourage giving them a timeline to complete something versus, you have like 5 minutes to clean your room. Maybe you have a couple of hours. By the end of the day, I want your room cleaner by the end of the week. For them to know their appointments, I encourage my parents to write their appointments on calendars so that they can see it, so that they are aware that their appointments are coming up, and they are able to, especially the older ones, to be more proactive on their appointments.
When I have talked to parents, at times, and I think that this is a lot of, especially when children are younger, it's kind of like, we're going to go and, you have a dentist appointment today. You have this today. And that may seem like, well, that's the way we were raised. And I would say that's my experience. My mom didn't have a calendar. Well, we had a calendar, but it wasn't like for me to look at and say, oh, I guess on Thursday I have this. My parents led those conversations, but autistic individuals really benefit from being able to understand what is predictable. So if every day they typically come home from school and then they do what they do, you have a routine at home, then that's helpful. But if on Tuesday they're having a dentist appointment, it's really important for them to learn to defer to a calendar. And that's where I would just say, is the calendar accessible to the clients? Is it in an area of the house? Is it at their level? Is it on their eye level so that they can see it? Is it read in a way that they can understand it, so that they can, even if it's just pictures, for them to know, oh, this is what we're doing. And because a parent can easily then refer, hey, it's the beginning of the week. Let's look and see what we got planned for today. Oh, so today is Tuesday now. So what's happening today? And then have the child look, as opposed to saying, we're going to dentist, I'm picking you up at 2:00. It's kind of like, this is what's going to be different this week. The more that we encourage predictability, it's important and as often as we can, let them know that there's something that's going to happen that's different today. It just helps them. It doesn't mean that it's foolproof. And I had a parent a long time ago say to me, well, they need to be flexible. But I always say, you start with predictability and then you encourage flexibility after they're stable. So sometimes they just, because we all do better when things are predictable, the more they have in there. So I even say timelines, that they could have a goal for this week, or again, how they break down. And then as they get older, how do they set that up? What do they like? Some of them would, as they get older, if they have a phone or they have some kind of like a tablet, they can have that on there can be electronic calendar. It doesn't have to be up here if they have access, and they can put things on it themselves, and they can learn to do that with their assignments. How do I break things down? That is not a one and done kind of topic. That takes time for them to learn it, because, well, let's be honest, you probably were learning that, as an adult, you might still need some help with that sometimes. So I think that's really important to begin with those little steps to help parents, so that they begin to learn, oh, I can really do this. It's just nobody swallows, does something all at once. It happens in a bit at a time. So it's really encouraging. How do we teach them responsibility, and how can we start that now? Again, if you talk to a parent, they may have like 8 things that need to be changed in their, and because right now they're really exasperated with their child, or even if they're not. We're, with kids, it's just like and especially autistic children, it can be like we are so easily aware of their flaws or what is difficult for them in the world or in school or in the family, etc. And it's really important just to hold back and to not focus on that. It's really focusing on the one thing. What is the one thing that needs to be worked on now? And to be specific. So if it is, let's say, to clean the room, then let's just focus on how that is done. Let's focus on that routine as to what we would encourage. And it can be that you set up a mini routine of these are the 4 things you want to do when you're cleaning your room, and then and have them walk through that with you, and that you're helping them walk through that. And so if they're really little, there's some things that are more difficult to do. I remember being like 5 and making a bed was not easy. It wasn't as easy as it was when I was 10. So it's a matter of like, where can they start right now? And if they have issues, often children, autistic children often have executive functioning issues as well. They often have ADHD. So it's kind of recognizing if they're like having executive functioning issues where it is difficult for them to have like to do 5 things, then that's where they need the breakdown. And that's why you can use paper. I think paper is great. I think it can be first go make your bed and then come back to me. Then go clean up everything that's on the floor. Put it in put it in the hamper or put it in the drawer. Whatever needs to happen. And then and then you're doing it like that. But then at some point it can be, okay, let's do a list, because you don't always, I think parents sometimes they're always the focus and the like, Mom, what should I do next? What should I do next? Which is fine to begin with, but eventually you want the child to be thinking, Mom said I need to clean my room. Okay, what's my room? What do I need to do? And that they begin to say, oh, here's my checklist. Here's what we've always been doing, and I can do this. And that's what you want to help them to kind of focus on. I'm sharing a lot of information. Does anyone have any questions while I'm talking?
Hey, I don't have a question, but I did want to say something. Sorry.
Oh, go for it.
Video. Okay, there we go. So I did, I can't see. Okay, so I did want to say I just wanted to ask if anyone else on here has their own children who are on the spectrum, because I do have 2 children of my own that are on the spectrum.
Very good question. Why don't I just pull this off for a second so I can
See everybody.
Yeah, so everybody can see each other.
So I can answer that question. I don't have a child, I have a grandchild. And also my husband is on the spectrum, and nobody realized for years. He only realized after we had a grandson, and I always assumed he knew. And
Wow.
as I began to talk and share about our grandson and the capabilities he had and the challenges he had, one day he said to me, I think I'm on the spectrum. I said, you think? I was like, but here's the thing. He was a very poor performer in school, extremely artistic, like to the point of winning so many awards and being able to go down to the, Library of Congress and go into the archives of old Whistler and artists and, see their paintings and such. He was able to function very well. And one of the ways he learned social interaction is that he got into acting. And so he was even a professional actor for a while. So the point being, there's so many capabilities. And when he took his SATs, even though he was barely a C student except for art, he scored in the top 5%. But he was bored at school. The information came too slow. It didn't come in a way. So he read and he researched. He still does everything. So having a grandson on the spectrum as well has taught me so many things. I forget because they function so well that all of a sudden, like with my grandson, one time we had Christmas, we had people coming over if we forgot to prepare him. And so when somebody knocked on the door, he kind of scurried off into a chair in the side and got in a fetal position, go, what's going on? Nobody told me about this. What's happening? So I forget because they've adapted so well. So I don't know if anybody else has any other.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I have a 24, she's 24 now, and my youngest is 8. And they're both on a spectrum, but my 24-year-old did not get diagnosed until she was 19, which is when my 8-year-old was 2. And once the BCBA was coming to our house, she was like, that's what's wrong with Tahira, right? Like, she's on a spectrum, but she had only been diagnosed with ADHD her whole life. And for my daughter, just speaking with her the other day, we have really real open conversations. And she was just, basically calling me like a bad parent when she was born, when the way I treated her, which was fine. I allowed her to vent. But of course, she said she felt like her life changed later once she found out what was really wrong, because it gave her the opportunity to research and to learn different things that was really going on with her. And that really helped her, And of course, I apologize. I'm like, how am I supposed to know if the doctors didn't know? And that's not
right.
Right.
And speaking of ADHD, probably 10 years ago, when I was a different CSB running their outpatient, I started seeing people coming in, young people, adults coming in, being diagnosed with bipolar or ADHD or, oppositional defiant or conduct disorder. I started seeing this happening, and I began to realize, because of my grandson, because of my husband, these people are on the spectrum and they're being diagnosed wrong. So anyway, I got a lot of support from the leadership there. And actually one of my therapists had realized they had someone in their family on the spectrum, went and got special training to be able to assess. But what I realized is, just because even in my own little tiny private practice that I have, I always really look at, there's diagnosis that triggers for me, we need to look closer.
Absolutely.
And make sure that they're and I don't know that like, in my mind, it's not about, they're not neurotypical. And I understand they're not neurotypical, but there's so many attributes. I'm very fortunate that my husband and my grandson are very high functioning, but to me, it's a different evolution of the brain that has actually become necessary in this technological society. So I think if we give people the right, like your daughter, you're 20, my husband was extremely successful in his career and continues to be, even though he's semi-retired. But so there's so much that your daughter is going to be able to do.
She went to school. She completed college, only 2 years, but she went to culinary art school. But they're both hot, which I know is not really right to say, but they are both high functioning. My 8-year-old, though,
I don't know if that's not right to say, or I don't know how else to designate. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms. Karen. I'm sorry.
Designate what
No,
you're
it's
trying
okay.
to say.
I think that the trend, I think that it's like you either have autism or you don't. And I feel like sometimes when people use high functioning, it's almost to dismiss the fact that there really is a difficulty that's still there, even though it's really that you don't notice it as much, and that they can blend into society easier than those who have more limitations. And I think that's really where those who I've like the conversations that have been around those who have autism, who struggle with that. That's typically why they say that they don't like the term high functioning, because it's like,
well, what
you're
am
almost like denying the fact that there's a problem, almost like, you only have this one cavity or something like that. Like, it's almost like one thing.
Right. Well, I've never seen it from that perspective, because when I talk to people about, like, if I say something will happen and I'll mention my grandson is autistic, immediately they think he's nonverbal. He doesn't engage. There's this perception, and I go, no, that's not him at all. And then I try to tell him, as many personalities as there are on the planet, people on the spectrum have
exactly right.
the same, that's why I refer to high functioning, is not to negate that there's challenges.
Right. And I feel like that
Right.
goes
And
back
I
to
don't think,
the, go
I
ahead.
don't think that that's what you were trying to do. I
Mhm.
just know that when I say it, that it definitely makes me feel that way, but I really also don't know how else to say it. I guess for me,
think
I
that is a
always
challenge.
say, yes, my kids are both on the spectrum and they are able to do other things that some kids may not be able to do. Like my 8-year-old, the speech therapist in the beginning, although he was nonverbal, she was like, he's savant. Because although he was nonverbal at 2, because if we did diagnose it in the States, like old boy said earlier on the video, he would be hyperlexic. He has hyperlexia. He started reading at 2. So it's like, I don't like saying it, because like you said, it's almost like me saying, oh, well, I only had one cavity my whole life. Well, guess what? You've had cavities though, right? So you're not cavity-less, so that's just for me, and I have to figure out another way to say it. But I guess I just try to say, there are so many, there's like a whole array. That's why it's called the spectrum.
That's right.
And it just depends on where you are.
I would say that's exactly right. It's such a we're really in the beginning of understanding things. I feel like the more we understand it, we have technology to understand the brain and the brain development, and we can do more research this way. It really changes how our perspective of what it means to be neurodiverse, and understanding where people struggle and where they struggle with maybe normal society. But I really feel like, a lot of this has changed because we have more instruments to notice, wait a minute, there's a pattern here. And the pattern back in the olden days was this small, and it was basically more like nonverbal or very like in their own little world, never. And now our spectrum is larger. And so right now we have people who, and so were they not there before? No, they were there. It was like they're questioning, there's a lot of scientists. There's a lot of people that, we just said they were quirky scientists that, they didn't really, they would just, work 12 hours a day, and they were so focused that, they figured out all these these huge achievements in science and in all kinds of different mathematics and all these areas. And it's because they have that focus that most neurotypicals don't have. And so there's a lot that we're learning that, and it's a process of us learning it. So I think that, that's where all this is, I won't say groundbreaking. It's a matter of doing it. Like I was just listening to, and you'll hear in one of the videos later on, the video will say something like, there's going to be this many people turning 18 and with autism in the next 10 years. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's true. I'm not like denying that. But the thing is that those people in the last 10 years or 20 years, there have been people who have been, who have turned 18, who weren't diagnosed, who are struggling in our world today. And those are also my concern. And I always ask when I first meet someone, I say, who I learned who has autism, I say, well, when were you diagnosed? Because my first question is, because when I ask that, because that means how many years were you misunderstood? Because that's, how we look at behaviors, how I answer you. And if I'm a little girl and I'm awkward in it, or we're, like not what we were taught for manners, then we say, oh, what is wrong with your daughter? That's how we act until we understand that there's something else going on. And then we understand, oh, this is where they are challenged, or, oh, this is how I can motivate them or encourage them to do, to feel better about what they're doing. So it does take a minute, and it's a process. There's nothing, it's not, and everybody is different. Like you said, someone said to me recently, like, because they're an introvert, that I heard that there's a spectrum and that introvert was on one end and autism was on the other. And I said, how about no? I said, I've known a good amount of people over the last 18 years that I've had, I've been working with autistic children and adults. And they're like, they're just like the rest of the population. They're just, some are, don't want to talk to nobody. They're just, in their world. And and are very introverted, and some are not. I mean, there are actors and actresses that are autistic because that was their way of kind of managing their social skills. It's like when we talk, is like a give and take, and I don't actually know what you're going to say, but if we're playing lines, I do know what to say. I know exactly what to say. So, and when Teresa was talking about all the different diagnoses, that was my experience initially. Was that back in the day, I had my first client that he was oppositional, and he was odd, and he had some oddities that typical 10-year-olds didn't have. And I was just learning about Asperger's, and so that's why I encouraged the family to get him tested, and I was right. And that's how it began my journey of like recognizing when I saw, like I used to call the alphabet diagnosis as ADHD, although you could have ADHD at the same time, but ADHD, ODD, OCD, and all these bipolar. And it's like, some of these things, yes, you can have both of them, some of those comorbidity, but the point is that when there's an alphabet, it's like, because those people of diagnosis, that people don't understand, well, I wonder if there's a theme of autism here. It took a long time. When I first started, it was really hard to find people, psychologists who actually tested accurately. And I think I've shared this before, but I mean, I had one, I literally walked in the door and said, I'm a counselor. This client is, I believe, has Asperger's. It was Asperger's at that time, and I need you to do testing to see if she has autism. And he said yes, which in my opinion was really him just wanting the money. Honestly, I'm just being straight with you, because in the end, he said he gave her schizoaffective disorder on a 10-year-old. Yeah, that's really good science there. And thankfully, because I'd worked well with the mom trusted me more than him, because, and of course, what mom wants, she doesn't have to understand a lot to know that schizo don't sound right. And he looked at me, and I said, I was quite firm, and and I looked at him, and he was like, I said, what is this? And basically he said, well, she can't be autistic because she can talk. So it goes back to what Teresa was saying. And I'm like, it's called a spectrum. And he was like, oh, it can be different. And I'm like, so that's why I'm saying he didn't go with his limits, that he didn't understand autism. And that was not appropriate for him to do it, which of course with insurance wasn't going to let us that year do another psychological. We had to wait. So, which anyways, the world went on. She did get diagnosed, and she's probably, she's a grown up now, but anyways, but all that to say is there's always a fight. And that's where, parents, it's just, and unfortunately my experience in Virginia, it's like a hit or miss that people understand like how to get resources. It's like it's sometimes some parents just seem to get the right people to tell them the right things, and other parents, it's kind of like a challenge. And that's one of those things I would like long-term wise to make that it's easier, like when you're diagnosed, like where the resources are, how to get in touch with things, and that sort of thing. Since I'm talking about it, I'll just tell you now, our plan is that it'll be at the end of January or early February. We're actually having a Kim Clary, who is an occupational therapist, is going to come and speak to us about sensory integration and sensory processing disorder. And those of you, she is super cool. She is an occupational therapist who is autistic. So she has a great story to tell, as well as really where her sensory issues are. I had the privilege of just having some time with her one afternoon, and we just were talking up a storm, because I think that sensory issues are often not factored in especially in outpatient therapy for autism. It is something that is not usually focused on with kids, and it's almost like we ignore those issues, like almost like you just need to get over them. But actually, what that actually causes them to do is become more distressed and have mental health issues, probably more later in their life, and even at that age. And they have to learn. It's us learning to accept who they are, and that we all have quirks, and there's maybe more like a little different. And we're all a little different sometimes. So it's a good thing. So I'm excited to have her. I think she's going to teach us more. We learned, Christine and I had heard her this past spring and just really enjoyed her. And I'm excited to bring her to, because I feel like that influence can really make a difference when you understand teaching sensory. I encourage parents often to go to somewhere. How about to get them tested, to understand testing, even to get books that even if you learn some information, because that sensory piece can make a big difference in how the child's anxiety and how we can reduce some of those issues. So I'm
Thank
excited.
you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up.
Karen, you were talking about going to get assessments. I don't know. I'm not as involved as I once was, but CHKD has a very good department for doing
Yes,
assessments.
now they do.
If
And
you
it
can
can take
get
a year to
in.
get in.
If you can get in.
Yes, I'm very aware of them. Oh, yes, because it used to be back in the olden days. It used to be the Virginia Department of Health for Norfolk, and they but that program was absorbed with CHKD. It's been a few years, about at least closer to
one of the
15 years
first
ago.
trainings I ever went to.
And so they are, yes, they are, and they're very comprehensive, both like mental, like psychology wise, as well as like they do a full exam, but that can take a year to get into.
Right. What I was going to say too is that they often offer training if you can get on their mailing list. I mean, CHKD in general on parenting, all kinds of things, but I don't know if Dr. Aiello is still there. That's the first training I ever had.
That's good. Yeah, he's real good. That we're really I have exposure to him as well. It's been very good. So yeah, it will be, CHKD has a lot of different things. And at the same time, they are very backlogged, and I don't even know, like in their new inpatient placement, how much they have. I haven't explored to see how much they address autism there. I would say there's you'll learn. I enjoy children a whole lot, and I have my whole career in counseling really began with children, and that's where my background is in child development, as my undergrad is mainly in. But I would say that my passion has become really working with adults, not because I can't work with kids, but because the adults get missed. So that's really why I'm even doing this training, because I feel like a lot of times we just they're kind of like left to their own devices, and we want to kind of go around that. So what I really want in terms of really focusing, kind of bringing us back to what we're doing in the training, we talked about details, and these are just areas that I really encourage parents to kind of address and look at, because sometimes parents, they're very busy. When you're busy, it's hard to kind of think about being intentional, but these are really kind of things that are important. Christina, like, how do you present these issues, or anybody else who's a counsel, who has clients, how do you present these issues or ask these questions? Again, these are issues that are great to put in your treatment plans.
So obviously those that work at Western Tyler know that in the assessment that these questions are asked, like how they do these things very narrowly.
DLA.
So I go back to that, but I also ask again at the beginning with my clients, like what are their responsibilities in the home? Do they have responsibilities? How do we do those and carry those out? For instance, I do have a young guy who's about 15 years old who has an Alexa, and sorry if that's off anybody else's, who's literally at every session at 4 o'clock, it goes off in our session because it tells him to do his chores. But his Alexa is set up throughout the day to tell him that his chores and what cards to pull to do his chores, and his family has a very good system with that. So I always ask my clients, like, what they do in the house, how their hygiene is, are they showering without having to be told? I mean, they're teenagers, so hygiene is probably not up to par anyway. But we, kind of encourage the hygiene. And then I know with our treatment plans, we do have an independent skills, like I can't remember how it's worded, but it's skills to help them progress with these kind of things.
That is right. In our treatment plans, those who work for Western Tidewater, if you're going through Credible, you will see ISP, ASD, ISP, and even if you're not doing it outpatient, you can still use those. You can look at those goals and see if any of those really apply, because we really broke those issues down that we find that are the most common that we address on the so that it would be really easier for our assessors and for us to, really develop a good treatment plan and in that way. So these are just areas that I think are often, it's that are just easy to discuss and how to, and are very concrete. How do we, household management, how do we put these things into routines? How do we have a routine in the morning? And how do we develop, taking care of our belongings and that sort of thing. We'll talk about it in a second, but money and time can be very too abstract, even, to understand, how this costs this much and I only have this much money. How does that work? And time is even more abstract because it's, it kind of is abstract in general, but it's very hard to understand. And just kind of how do we anchor them into time? And that timer, like you were suggesting, is a great way. I encourage most of my clients have some kind of device, and just encouraging them to put those things in so they can remind them. And it's even not just an anchor of it's time for me to take my medicine or to make my bed or get dressed. It could also just be an anchor of it's 12 o'clock. It's 1 o'clock, because for them, sometimes they can float away. I'm saying float away like they're spacey or something, but because it's really easy for them to lose track of something because they're so focused on what they're doing and where they're really at. So that's important, trying to ground them in that. I mentioned the issue of breaks and the need for space. This is important as they're growing up. Parents can begin to show that, help them to say, I think you need a break, which typically kids deny that. But at the same time, it's important to teach them. And then as they get older, it's important to them you're trying to teach them to understand, well, maybe when you're overly anxious, or maybe when you're actually wanting to, you're crabby to your mom, you're just not willing to talk to other people, or just kind of feeling uncomfortable. It's that you need a break and you need space. We all could use a break, and adolescents need a break, but need space apart from people. But those autistic individuals need more space because because of their neurodiversity. It's their brain needs a little more time to defrag than most. And it's important just to give them that opportunity. So, and to teach them, wow, it sounds like you need a break right now, or what would this be like? And then just sometimes it's when they just get home from school or get home from something, but it can be, doing something new, or, this was a pretty busy week because we moved or whatever, that there's a need to kind of let's give ourselves the afternoon to do something different. Maybe not as many things get done at the same time, but sometimes it's just better to give a break and less things get done than to try to get things done and there'll be a huge meltdown because we're not ready. Part of that, with any child, with anyone maturing, is to kind of understand what my body is telling me. And that's always what we're working on generally in counseling, but it's even more so with those who have autism and the parents, because the parents, they're thinking, well, when I was 15, I was able to do this. We don't really think about it much, but that's really, we have to think, well, wait a minute, my child starts to get go down the hill or needs more help now, or maybe they need a snack. It's just that the idea of halt, are they hungry, angry, lonely, tired? There may be a need for a break when it's really not that serious of an issue, but they need some time to kind of regroup before they can address what's going on. And so, again, this is just encouraging them to earn more freedoms and to kind of look again, sometimes using, we were talking about consequences before, but it could be as easy as just, this is how you earn something. Sometimes what we say, I use the word lazy. Sometimes people, sometimes they are just lazy, but I think a lot of times it can be what I was just talking about, that when there's a lot of activity going on in the brain, there's been a lot of social interaction or new things going on. that how they appear to be lazy might be just that their brain has had too much going on. And that can just be inquiring, asking questions, even setting an alarm and saying, hey, why don't you give yourself a break right now? But you have these 3 things that need to be done by the end of the night. So how do you want to do, like kind of helping them problem solve that? Because there is a time for them to be lazy. And sometimes they're just overwhelmed. Being lazy can be overwhelming. I mean, that sounds really funny. I said it the wrong way. What can appear to us as being lazy can be that they're overwhelmed and feeling depressed, like they don't have an answer. They don't know the next thing to do. And when someone's overwhelmed, it's just easier to sit on the couch or play a game or do something and kind of avoid the life in that way. How about you, Christina? What have you had experienced with your clients?
I've experienced that most of my clients, the motivation to do these things really isn't there just because they haven't been pushed to do it. They often are wanting to do it, or they get so overstimulated. Again, they look like they're lazy and they're not cleaning their room and not getting motivated by anything. But really, at the end of the day, they're just overstimulated. And it's, a teenager's room can be very overstimulated when it comes to cleaning it. So,
absolutely. I think that's often, sometimes it's like, well, if it's overstimulating, well, then take care of it. But if you're already overstimulated, it's like that's when people freeze. And I have some clients that aren't really motivated by money. Some of my clients are, they don't understand the concept of money very well. And so it's kind of like, then we find, how do we help them to earn and see that there is still a consequence? Money, even more so in our modern society, a lot of us don't even use cash. So it's not like it's really obvious that if we have $100, oh, wow, I spent $75 on this, I only have 25 left. We don't do that a lot in the as much as we did, our parents did. So it's important to kind of recognize that, maybe showing them another, how do we save up? How do we earn when we get to do that next thing that is like a favorite way to spend, or a thing that they are looking forward to, how they see money, how they pick out, like, even what they're going to do, like for Christmas, like if you got, as a family, if there's an exchange, how do they, like, how is that an easy thing? Do they make good choices in helping them to make decisions on that are realistic, not necessarily, sometimes it's just not, they're not anchored. If you're not anchored in time, in the how things cost, then it's easy to say, well, I'm going to buy you this when it's, something that costs $500, because if you're not aware of it, then you're not thinking about that. So again, this is just me saying again, is that, taking small risks to try new things. Again, where is there a curiosity or an interest? And maybe it wasn't there, or maybe we just never got to it because something changed. We didn't have an opportunity to do it. Now we can. Maybe there's somebody new in their life that they can talk about horses that they didn't have before. Has there been any research or a video? Sometimes even opening, that's the fun thing about like having YouTube or other kind of things on the internet. They can learn about something where it's relatively no cost, and they can learn different ways of kind of that situation. I see there's a raised hand. Was that just a?
Hello.
Agree. Yes.
Yes. Good morning. Hold on. Let me. Yeah, I was. I have a question. My son has been identified as a level 1 on the spectrum, and I've worked a lot with children on the spectrum and with other disorders, so I'm very familiar with it. But it's just kind of different when you are the parent of a child on the spectrum. It's hard to. I find myself finding it hard to wear the hat as like the in-home counselor or someone like that with my own son. So I try to incorporate some of the things that I do with the children that I work with. But as I stated, it's kind of hard as being the parent wearing both of those hats. But where I'm coming across road, I've tried a lot of those interventions as far as the charts and the checklist and things like that. But where I'm coming in across road now with him is the foods that he eats, we are at a standstill where he won't eat anything. Now he has exhausted certain foods that he eats
goes
on a
to.
regular. So now we're at a point where, well, Mom, I'm tired of those foods, but I don't want to try anything else, and I am stuck. I don't know what to do or what to feed this child because he won't try anything new.
Right.
And he's tired of eating the things that he's used to eating.
Well, and thank you for bringing that up. I would say that I won't say it's every child or every person who has autism, but it is a good majority or not uncommon for those who are on the spectrum who have like a difference to variety in food. They just would rather eat 3 different things. Usually the things that are not the greatest for, like white flour things like pizza, spaghetti, maybe a hamburger, macaroni and cheese, like don't, maybe some applesauce, but really hardly any vegetables or fruits.
Yeah.
And so, which is really hard on the body. So, I am not a dietitian, but what I would suggest is that actually, I was just talking to someone else about this because of a client that I recently got. And I think that it's, that maybe just to looking into occupational therapy or a dietitian, because like sometimes like they are more trained, like part of occupational therapy. I mean, it's usually mostly like with babies, but there's also a part where, they're working with how do they can teach them to be okay with other like textures, because sometimes it's a texture thing. It's all kinds of different things, but helping they would be the ones to get have strategies as to doing that, and just to see, well, where would we go? Like how do we, because it's because it isn't something like we'll just do it, it's like they usually are very narrow in that. And and so there's a lot of pieces of that. It's almost like they're overly sensitive to their palate is overly sensitive to food. And to textures. It's like it's a sensory issue. And so they're more likely to get help that way. And I think that CHKD is a pretty, I think they're pretty good at that. They really have a team of occupational therapists that work in these areas. So I would just kind of research it that way and ask them to see if they have someone that would recommend, because I think it's a real concern when you have, you want them to eat right at all, and then you want them to eat food that actually is going to be helpful. Like I've been listening to, these are like the things I've been doing since in these research. I've been doing a lot of like listening to podcasts and just different people talking. And there's one in particular, like there's a couple that I really one's called Two Sides of the Spectrum, and it's actually the people who are speaking are occupational therapists. And there's one that is in particularly, it's about, they are talking to an autistic doctor who had all kinds of fascinating things about, I have to listen to it again because it was just so much good information biologically that is different in a neurodiverse person. Like here's like something, for instance, if no one is like one that my brain remembered is that, often those on the spectrum typically have issues with constipation. A lovely topic on a Thursday morning, but anyways, and typically people think about it as, oh, they need to drink more water. They don't have enough fiber in their diet. They're not exercising, which of course are contributing factors. But what this doctor was explaining is that those autistic individuals actually have more elasticity in their colon. So it actually contributes to it, which is really like way above my brain. So there are things about the body that we may not know about, or we're just learning to know about. For someone who has autism, we just don't really think about that autism really affects on that, like the constant, on those kind of levels, but it really does. And so the more you, that could be an opportunity also to look into. Another one that I really like is called Uniquely Human. And it is also, typically there's somebody on there that is also on autism spectrum, and adulting on the spectrum. That one is actually obviously adulting. They're really, it's like interviewing different adults who are on the autism spectrum, and even just their perspectives and what they experience, and so which sometimes gives a different picture. It helps people to understand, what the variety of people, what they've been going through. But that's just some suggestions that could be there. So I hope that was, let us know how that goes about the occupational therapy. That would see if there's any, if they would, or what they recommend.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So in terms of like doing, these are just, again, this is more like a review of just like what could be, what is helpful to try something new. It's just so easy to be in a rut and to really focus on the behaviors. It's really important to kind of have something that you're kind of helping them to see. Because just like us, we do well when we have something to look forward to. We do well when someone points out, not when how you didn't do something right, or where you kind of, something's not perfect or needs help, but really when they focus on your strengths. And we all need that. So this, again, I mentioned something about this earlier, but again, using timers to anchor into time. I think of it as a grounding technique, not just, oh, I have to remember, oh, now I should, go, I got to go to this appointment soon. That's helpful, and for sure. But I think it's really important to really sometimes recognize when people kind of, I know you've all experienced it sometime when it's like, oh, it's already that time. Oh my, like we've all had that experience. Those autistic individuals struggle with that more. So it's important sometimes just to have an alarm to go, oh, that means it's 12:30. Oh, this is, whatever time. So that's important to kind of encourage. So, and also mini routines. I mentioned this, talked more about this in my last training. But basically it's kind of recognizing that autistic individuals do best with predictability. But you can't have a day where everything is always scheduled, every single, always the same way, because that's not life. Life, things come in, things come out. But having many routines built in, for instance, like how the morning is starting. In the morning, we always do these things. This is the way we get started. And it also could be, this is how we end. Or this is how we handle like a Saturday or a day that we're not, at work or school. Those kind of things can be helpful. How do we prepare for like our after school, after work routines? These are just ways to kind of help, like, oh, when I get home, I always do these 4 things. These could be like, I change into different clothes, I have a snack, or I have some way of vegging out and having a little space time, and then I get started on some other things. For us grown-ups, might be to make dinner, might be to do have some kind of errand run, or maybe it's just or like for homework for kids, or whatever it is, that there's some kind of routine that they know that happens right when they get home. That stability helps build them, like, this is what we how we do things. It's a predictability in an unpredictable world. Again, these things take time. I'm not saying like, okay, now you probably have 8 scheduled. Just start with 1. Just see how it does. And I always, if you ever haven't seen me before, I'm really into the fingers and the hands. Don't make it like this many. Just make it like 4 or 5 things that they can say. In the morning I do what? I brush my teeth. I change my clothes or whatever. I get dressed. I eat breakfast. I get my clothes. I get my shoes on. It's simple, and so that it can be repeated easily. It's not like a whole list. And the more that we speak that way, what are the 5 things that you do in the morning? And that helps them to kind of remember it, especially when they're younger. Now, the older kids will probably roll their eyes at you, but it doesn't matter, because in the end, as long as you're not annoying, you're really trying to teach them to remember things that need to get done. So so this is my some encouraging video I wanted to share with you about independence for adults with autism.
Tonight, we begin an occasional series about people living with autism and other spectrum disorders, a place in the world. While reporting the history of autism for their book, In a Different Key, The Story of Autism, co-authors John Donvan and Karen Zucker found a program in Phoenix, Arizona that expands options for people living with autism. This is the first of 2 reports.
Why is it a big deal that Josh Kluger gets up every morning and makes his own breakfast and straightens up the place a little, and then remembers belatedly to go back and grab his lunch before he heads off to work, which takes a quarter-mile hike, texting all the way, before he reaches the bus stop, and then a 45-minute trip with 1 transfer along the way. And when I come on board and Josh shows me how to swipe my ticket, and it comes back?
Yes.
Why is that a big deal? Because until last year, Josh had experienced none of this. No apartment, no paying job, no bus pass even. Actually, he'd never ridden a bus on his own before last year.
How old are you now? I'm 36.
You only really began being able to ride the bus when you were already over 30.
I think so, yes.
What did you have to learn?
I learned how streets.
And though Josh is not the chattiest person around, except perhaps when he's texting,
I'm so confused.
you can tell from his stride and from his air of confidence about where he's heading that Josh really likes the life he has right now.
Is this ours? Yes. Okay.
And that he's going to keep going with it, autism or not. With autism, it's usually been the kids whose faces we see when the topic is discussed. Children like these. We root for their success in school and on the playground, and we've come to recognize that even a little boy like this one, who may look disconnected and whose autism keeps him from speaking many words, nevertheless can sing, and therefore also has something to say.
That's me. Is that Jake or? Yes. Jake, which one's yours? That's not me.
But the kids grow up inevitably, so that the boys whose photos you just saw, they've become these men. We gathered them together to make a point. This one is now 19-year-old Dylan, and this little boy, called Stuart, he's now 22. Josh, you've met, he's 36. This kid, he's 21 now, and named Ian. Craig, he's a 26-year-old now, and Jake, he grew into a man also. He's 22.
Cheese pizza!
And the point is, adults don't get nearly the attention and support the kids do, maybe because they're not as cute or because people forget that autism is lifelong. But it is, and that fact is the driving idea behind a new pilot program called First Place Transition Academy, located in Phoenix, Arizona, in which these same young men are today the pioneers.
Looks really good.
Yeah. And then are you gonna mix it with anything?
Tongs. If you have any tongs.
Yeah. Where would you find tongs at?
In the store.
In the store?
There are 9 of them in all, paired off together in a cluster of apartments in a complex where their neighbors are mostly retirees who have no autism connection. They eat together and learn together. 2 years of specialized training designed to improve their odds of having, let's call it, a successful adulthood. Which means what?
And what donuts would you like for that one?
Well, take Ian, who is now holding down a paying job arranged for by the program, showing that he can be good at customer service.
I got the lemonade and morning buzz.
Social interactions can be enormously challenging for people on the spectrum. That's part of the reason that unemployment among autistic adults hovers near 80%.
Hello, how's it going? Pretty good, how you doing?
Not long ago, that included Ian, who is an unfailing optimist. Before you came here, where were you? Were you in high school?
I was in my parents' house for at least 2 years. I enrolled, and here I am now, a year later. I am satisfied with my future.
What is your future? Do you know?
It's hard to predict right now.
Sure.
It's a brief idea. I'd like to live in an apartment, pay my own rent, have my own car, and have a career, in other words. Because the part-time jobs is kind of tedious, but it's my main focus for now.
Well, that's all about learning how to do jobs, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
The other men go to other workplaces, a garden that raises produce for sales to restaurants.
Awesome.
An animal shelter, which happens to be a volunteer job, but that doesn't matter. Knowing how to be professionally responsible and productive does, like being on time for work, dressing correctly for the situation, completing tasks assigned reliably. These are learned skills that do not necessarily come easily to all members of the group because of their autism.
So on the worksheet, guys, you are putting a check mark for the items that you're going to need to purchase in your first apartment.
And support staff literally imparts lessons on the logistics of adult life, like this session, held in a lecture hall made available by Gateway Community College. It's a class on how to navigate the options available in public transport, how to get from here to there, with quizzes.
Ian, other ones?
Exact fare required.
Exact fare required.
When it comes to successful adulthood, it's this sort of mundane-seeming know-how that in fact can be crucial.
How important is that to their success in this program?
Yeah, it's critical. You know, it's one of the skills that we target really early on. I mean, again, this is the thing that's going to allow them to access employment. It's going to allow them to access different social activities, different quality of life things.
So getting around is key to independence then?
Absolutely. It's critical.
Which brings us back to Josh. That 45-minute commute of his landed us here.
So this is your place of work, huh? Yes. Wow.
Josh works for the Arizona Diamondbacks baseball team. He and another member of the group named Jake. They've been cycling through a variety of jobs here, some in the office upstairs, and now they're getting their hands dirty with grounds maintenance.
Josh, you're not a big baseball fan.
I'm not. I don't like sports a lot.
But you're a work fan. It sounds like you really love this job.
Anyway.
In a way. Oh.
Okay, true.
Okay, but he loves being a working man, even though his boss here, Marion Rhodes, says it has not always been smooth.
We had a thing with his badge, that he was losing his badge constantly. I said, "Where's your badge?" And he's like, "I left it here," whatever. And I said, I had to explain to him, your badge is like the key to your home. Mm-hmm. That's the key to our ballpark. So if you lose it, someone has the key to access our building at any time. And I said, so what's the answer here? We now have him drop the badge off in the morning and pick the badge up. And so he hasn't, now he's always clocked in and clocked out.
But that's what learning is about.
Are you willing to let these guys make mistakes more than you would other people?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And why is that important?
You have to meet them where they are.
Josh's mom has been astounded by the change she's seen in the past 12 months.
There are so many ways that he has changed and grown, that he's going to school, he's learning classes, he's taking responsibilities for his homework, he's taking responsibility for his budgeting.
This is all new.
This is all new.
This is something he's learned as a middle-aged man.
As a middle-aged man.
Wow.
The growth has been amazing. It's truly been amazing.
If Josh were not here, where would he be in life?
At our house, doing probably the same thing and not being very happy. And I don't know what his future would have been.
And back at the apartment complex, you can see how these guys, some of whom had no friends to speak of before in their lives, are learning to help each other out. They are, in short, a community. And while this pilot project has enrolled only men, who today make up roughly 80% of people recognized as autistic, the full program will grow to include women as well. But now something needs to be said about that group shot we started with, and in particular about the man on the lower right. He was once that singing boy. And in fact, he does not live with the other men. He can't, because his autism affects him differently from the others. But there is a place being built in Phoenix that will also have room for him. That story in part 2, tomorrow.
So, just wanted to, it's time for a break. I just wanted to kind of, that was a good way to transition to our next section. And so I will give you a break now. It is 11:38. So we'll just start like about 10 to 12, and then we'll go from there. Thanks so much. Hey, everyone. Great. Let me pull up my screen. And great. So we're running down the last part of the bend, and so we're just going to talk about what supports are available. This is not comprehensive, but it's a beginning, a place to start. So I just wanted to first say, what is available, and these might just be, these are just some things that came to me. I know that there are more. Oops, sorry about that. As it moves forward before I want to. These are ones to consider as you're looking at what could be what a family needs more than just themselves. Christina, how have you used these services, or what do you with your clients?
A lot of these services my clients actually aren't aware of at the beginning. And so a lot of these services I've had to refer them to, or kind of like walk them through how to get in touch or how to even apply for them.
Yeah. When we're talking these issues of, so I'll just explain briefly what I'm talking about. Of course, just the question of if SSI disability, is disability an option or an issue? For some it is, and some it isn't. And it's important to talk about, like, that would be something to talk through with someone. And when they qualify, and of course, advocating is a continual process from, as a parent and what we do as professionals for them. In terms of support, in terms of like should it be a high school, like a trade school experience? Should they have some experience like that? Would they be open to doing DARS, which is developmental, really for job coaching and that sort of thing? And also the waiver. If someone has a diagnosis of an intellectual disability or autism that is documented, they have those documents. Waiver is more, there's more to it than me explaining it right now, but basically there can be some services available in their future if that's something that they need, and that would be there's a screening process for that. So basically what I put it in this way. Of course, Social Security is, these are just websites available. DARS, typically I know we have I have a card from DARS that I has contacted when I was working in Smithfield, and one of the representatives from there and are, you just get connected to them based on your own locality. The waiver is also referred through the CSB, is an actual screening that is completed through the CSB. These are more task oriented and are ongoing. The IEP obviously is continual advocacy. I recently just had a new client, and she mentioned how she, pushed for an IEP, even though the supports aren't very significant, but there's some, because she is aware that, we don't know the future, and we don't know what could, this child is in elementary school, and just aware that as time unfolds and being in middle school and high school, there could be things that aren't, may not be available to him if he doesn't have an IEP now, that can easily, change. It's easier to change an IEP than it is to start one. So that's just something to consider. And as you see, I wrote case managers are great ways to help for these kind of connections. These are great issues, things to put in your treatment plan to explore whether they're children or adults, and how, have these discussions with family, because it's not something that it's not just one thing. It's like, what is this? What are the possibilities? Some people, they'll go on to college because that's what they're good at. They're really good at school stuff, and other people aren't. And so they would do better at something that's more hands-on, like a trade school. And these are just people involved in what are they really good at? As they mature, what do they want to do? What gets them excited? Sometimes they have, when I had a client I had earlier this year, and he was his dream job would be to be a professional fisherman. Well, of course, that's not going to happen when you're 18. So what he is doing is he's went into welding. And that's something, because his other long-term goal was to be a underwater welder. So that's actually somewhere he can start. And he's aware, and when I discharged with him, he was, really excited about this opportunity that he's having. So it's not, isn't one size fits all. Everybody is unique. but it's important to have these conversations and also recognize that, you know, that family, sometimes they need help to recognize what is available or what could be just a possibility of that person's strengths in that way. So my mouse decided to be, the battery decided to die right at this moment. So my apologies as it flips around like crazy. Okay, now it's working again. Okay, good. And these are just, and these are areas that can be further like discussed, like in terms of learning what can be available. DARS is a great resource. Sometimes my experience has been that sometimes they're very good and sometimes they're kind of challenging to get a hold of and to try to, there is a backlog, but that doesn't mean that it isn't a good possibility for those. I'm really interested in getting people working. I feel like there's mental health issues that happen for autistic people because they just don't have really a purpose. We want to encourage them to get out and we try to find those kind of things. So these are just questions, and that just asking to kind of like would be again an area that we were thinking about. What kind of services are they serving? IEP? Is there if they're, you know, in high school, is there a transition goal? In the IEP, there is, I know people who, you know, in the school, that's really their job to kind of help them to kind of transition. And they're often that can be really helpful. Guardianship or a power of attorney is needed. That's something we'll talk about in a minute. Again, I've talked about some of these things before. Identification. It's just really important for clients, depending on their needs and how verbal they are, and if they have any kind of catatonia, for them to have like identification, not only that says, you know, like my driver's license stuff, but also says stuff like, I am, you know, hi, I'm Karen. I struggle with it. You know, this is, sometimes I might not speak because of this issue or something like that. So that there's like, somebody could understand it if there really was a crisis or a problem when they're not with you. A go bag, which is something I discussed prior in my last training, which is really kind of having something that they would develop, but you could help them to develop like things that they would keep together that are like, they help them to reduce their stress in public, reduce like any sensory overload, like for instance, like having noise cancellation headphones or a snack, some water, you know, just different things that can kind of help them know that, okay, I have the things I need if there's something happening. I even have a client who is very meticulous about his, and he carries in his bag a regular fork and spoon because he does not like plastic ones. So he carries them with him. He is fine with that. So if that's something that he, you know, if somebody has a thing about certain issues, then if it's something like that can be portable, then it's okay. It's a good thing to think about. And the documents. So like I made this again, you know, do they know about their documents? These are just conversations. You know, when I was a child, I didn't care, you know, those weren't things I took care of. Like my parents took care of them because that's what, you know, I wasn't old enough to handle them. But at certain ages, I became aware of where they are and what they are. You know, it's making that the covert overt. Like these are important documents. At some point, you might get to keep these, but right now I'm keeping them for you because, you know, you're not, you know, there's no reason for you to have them now. And I also mentioned that you know, personal identity and boundaries. I mean, these again, you know, I think these are issues a lot of times with all adolescents because there's just so much, they're just more exposed than what was going on 30 years ago. But at the same time, we want to help them to understand what boundaries are, because sometimes that's harder for them to recognize what it means to be to be private. You don't have to share everything, and for some, you know, oversharing is a challenge. What have you experienced, Christina? You're mute.
Yes, I am. I said, are you asking me what I was experiencing with the oversharing and the boundaries?
Yes, or in general with these questions.
So with the oversharing and boundaries, I do have clients that do overshare with their boundaries, overshare, and they have poor boundary skills because they don't know that they're not supposed to tell me some things in their life that I do not need to know. I have had many clients that have, especially on the spectrum, that have decided that they were going to go to the bathroom in the middle of their sessions and taken me with them. That is something that we do work with. We do work with boundaries, and try to, get them to understand that that's not appropriate, and that we don't need to tell everybody everything that we know about ourselves, even though they think we do. Some of them don't want to share anything, and some want to share everything.
Yeah. So these are just questions that are important to ask or to wonder about, and for parents to kind of say, where am I with these areas? How prepared are they? And it doesn't mean that everything happens at once. It just means we talk about them, and we talk about them on regular intervals in that way. And I put fireboxes. I'm old fashioned, and that was really like where my parents kept all of our important documents was in a box, one of those fireproof boxes. And now they have bags that are like that. And I think that was just something that was instilled in me. It's important. It's not a bad thing to teach teenagers to like how we keep things, that we don't, why we don't carry certain things around with us in our wallets, because that's, it's just like, what's safe? What's a safe thing? What should be protected? Okay. So this is just some definitions about employment, and it's pretty, competitive is just like they're with working like the way like we would work. They would get in terms of getting a job. They're independent, and there's no supports offered. Sometimes this is a challenge. I know that we have had clients that teenagers, when they get their first job, like do they talk about these things? And I'll say this in the next slide as well. Like, should I be telling my employers? And I think it's really in the individual's decision when you're really you're hired independently without like a support like DARS or something of that nature. Sometimes, but I don't think it's wrong. I think it's, you're protected there. Sometimes people feel like, I don't want anyone to know to see how it goes. And, that's really their judgment call. But sometimes what they really just need is a little bit more space. Like when they're, because a lot of times, teenagers, a lot of their jobs are very public jobs. They're like, fast food, or, they're working at at a store. It's not, I'm working over here in an office where it's quiet. Sometimes they need more space. And so sometimes just encouraging, how would I tell an employer that sometimes I just need more breaks because I have autism? It's not because I don't want to work. Supportive is really where they're in a system that a job is created for them. And so it's a more like, we're gonna make this work for you, and what can we give you to make you work? And then a secured or sheltered program is kind of like, I would think of more like Eggleston or something, where it is that it's more of where the employee is in a position where that is like kind of protected. Everybody is probably dealing with a disability themselves. So it's a little different that way. Christina, have you had you've had some clients that had been in these different situations, haven't you?
Yeah, I have some clients that are ID that have both supported employment and the sheltered employment. I also had an autistic individual that was supported employment and worked for, I think, a Goodwill or Salvation Army or something like that. And it was beneficial to them because they weren't able to address things like time off. And so that kind of helped them go in and learn the things that like we would go in and already know to do.
That's been my experience. I have some clients that are, where they kind of they have a position where they're more supported in that role, and they're with other individuals. And I have some that are, they just work in the workforce, and the autism is known because honestly, if the job fits and they're good, they're like the best employees, because if it's something that has to do with QA anything that has to do with really doing things right, they don't know how. I'm not saying they don't do anything wrong, but they have there is a need to do the things the way the book says to do them, and in a way that most of us don't feel that, you know, we can kind of, we do our best, you know, but that's not the way it's not how the way their brain works. So that's just some definitions to be aware of, and to see, you know, when you're talking to clients and as they're growing up, to see what are they going to need. You know, back in the olden days when I first started working with autism, I used to think of them, because I was an intensive in-home worker and counselor, and I would think, not like regardless of what age they were at, I would think, what do I see them at 25? 25 to me was like an age that made sense, because 18 we're all kind of still learning and we're probably still in high school. But by 25, do I see you being independent, or do I see you like you're going to totally be needing to be taken care of? Even those people who are really in a competitive employment situation, often because the work is stressful, they get it. Sometimes it's the rest of their life that they are challenged with paying their bills and making sure their house is clean, you know, cleaning out the refrigerator, those sort of things, because it took so much energy to do the job. And so that's kind of important to kind of recognize that it's sometimes, even when people are very successful in their job, they may need supports just to manage the rest of their life, because it just almost like wears them out to do both. That's consideration. And so you'll enjoy this. Let me just show this one with you. I just really like that video. Gets me teared up.
I know, that was awesome. I have a client who has cataloged his church's music library. He did some illustrations for one of his church members' groups for their book, and now he's working in a library doing cataloging. And
that's great. That's great. Like, some of those very detailed skills are just so not my skill set. So really, it's like a very exciting and it's just so I just love seeing people value.
So where are those companies here in Virginia? We need them.
So that's something I'm looking at. Actually, I found some, like, if you look on, I actually just honestly like looked on the web of like employers looking for autistic clients or something like, or client employment. And there was a few that I came up with. I'm trying to see if I can find the name. Christine, do you remember the one that I told you about?
I remember it, but I don't.
It's not right
in front of me.
It's like there's a few that are there, and part of it is like, I think that you know, really advocating as to what that. It's kind of reframing what autism is. You know, autism is often focused on like nonverbal or just some like difficult socialization skills, that sort of thing, instead of saying, well, wait a minute, though, their attention to detail is crazy good. So how can we, where would that be used? How can that be used? Like they were saying,
that the woman in one of those videos, she told the guy, you can't keep losing your badge. And this,
right.
So I have a client that keeps losing things. And I'm like, well, if you had to pay for it. And he was like, oh, I was like, yeah, if you had to pay for it. I said, because I'm pretty sure your mom didn't buy you a Dollar Tree water bottle. Those things are expensive. So I had to put it in terms of, money,
right?
Monetary. And he was like, oh, so he was like, well, I said, don't you have a wallet? And he was like, yeah, but he has 2 wallets and they're all over the place. I was like, well, use your wallet, put your wallet with your glasses, because you use your glasses every day. So when you get up, you put on your glasses and you put your wallet in your pocket. And he's like, oh. So I mean, so it's just kind of restructuring.
It is really building that little routine of like, how do they do that? Or like for some, it could be more like a go bag that they put everything like that and they keep it in there. But it is that practice, because at first it's kind of like, it doesn't necessarily make sense to them, or why would I need this? Well, because you don't know when you're going to need it. And I haven't asked my one client is very his go bag is quite extensive. That's the one I said it has silverware and a knife and fork for lunch. But he has whatever. It's almost like whatever you would think that you could possibly need. He has like something like that, a form of it in there, and that really reduces his anxiety that something could happen. Probably has a little first aid kit in there, and just whatever. And so not everybody cares about that stuff, but it's like what is needed. So that they can begin to say, oh, this is what I have. And then they learn to put it in the same place.
Right.
So that
I'm not autistic, but I have a go bag too. No. I'm like, I call it my bag of tricks because, we run into different clients, different ages and,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I'm like, okay, so would you like this? Oh, I have some of this and I have some of this. But you
usually don't have a meltdown or a crisis because you don't have it. Maybe when your clients does, but you don't. So that's that's really the difference, is that we're trying to provide whatever they need. Just encourage that conversation can make a big difference in that respect. So I'm glad you guys enjoyed that video. It's one of my it's just important. And I think that's one of those areas that I'm looking at as a wanting, caring about autistic people and wanting them to have how do we encourage that workforce. I don't have a real easy answer right now, as much as that that's something that I'm just trying to figure out, how do we help other employers to see that the little things that may be a challenge, like taking the badge at the end of the day, is worth it when you have somebody who's actually pretty good. But you can tell, in the different videos that we watched, that again, it is a spectrum. The video that we saw before the break, those young men were pretty, I was kind of laughed when he said middle age and he was in his 30s. I was like, really? That I think, most 30-year-olds don't think of themselves as middle age. But anyways, that's not the point. But when they were a little bit more, they were more dependent. They had more verbal issues, and there's a little bit more limitations. Whereas the people that were just interviewed, they clearly had more. Obviously, working with astrophysics, people it's kind of like way above my head. So that's just how it is. We just there's a spectrum. And so that's where you just never know where people's interests are, what's going to get them excited, what helps them, to do well. And is it the work? And sometimes, they are more hands-on, and sometimes, we just have to watch, maybe their hobbies. It's not like, oh, all my hobbies are going to become, could become my, my major job. No, but we all need hobbies. We all need things. Because when you think of even when you were a child, the things that you were exposed to, it made you who you are. And it probably opened doors for you to think of, like, well, I wonder about that career. Well, how about no? And other things that you would enjoy. And that's really kind of what helps us to kind of see, what our purpose is and maybe where we're good at, and just encouraging them. And that's how I am with my clients. I'm repeatedly telling them how well they do certain things, because I see it in them. And it's like, I feel like they live in a world that is much more aware of where they have difficulties, and they typically have anxiety about these things. And it's like, they just need to know that they actually do some things really well. So moving on, this is just a PowerPoint or a little chart that we put together about guardianship and power of attorney. Christina, you and I have talked about this many times, because we've had clients or parents who are like, what do we do about this issue? What do we do as our kids are turning, becoming adults? You want to share more about that?
So you're right. We often have clients that once they turn 18, the parents don't realize that now they realize they're adults, but they don't realize now these kids are 18 and are considered adults and get to make their own decisions, even if they are not competent enough to do so, because nothing has been put in place to allow someone else to do it. And so until something is put in place, they're the ones that have to sign their names, or they're the ones that have to make their appointments without maybe a release put on file. So the guardianship, Karen, do you want me to go over it, or?
Oh, I can. You're in a roll. Go ahead. You're fine.
Okay. So a guardianship is basically, it's through the court. It's court ordered. this is where they're going to lose their fundamental rights. They don't get to choose where they're going to live, what they're going to buy. They are not able to vote when they lose their guardianship. You actually usually need to be deemed mentally incompetent, or you're not able to make your own decisions. So this is something that's like, it's more the severe cases. And it's also the more costly option. I think the last time I heard it was about $2,500 to even start the process. The power of attorney, it allows for someone to act on your behalf. There's 4 different types of power of attorney, and it's just based on what you need. You don't need to go through the court system, but you do need to have it signed by the notary, and everybody that you are going to deal with, like such as providers and stuff, need a copy of that. I've only heard of one time that a power of attorney was not recognized, but after looking at the power of attorney, it was because it wasn't a legit one. You can actually go online and find the actual paperwork, not just write on a piece of paper and have a notary sign it. Like, you actually need to go get the actual paperwork and do it that way. They lose no rights when they get a power of attorney, so they're still able to vote. And so I encourage a power of attorney more, because when they get to the point where they decompensate, they might need somebody to step in for them. They might need, mom or dad to make their appointments or make decisions for them that they can't make at that time. And then when they are able to, they still can. So we're not taking their rights completely away. And I think it's kind of more personable if you have a power of attorney than a guardianship. So,
right. Thanks, Christina. When I first came, was first learning about these words, and I just assumed, especially mostly my clients who were also have an intellectual disability, I just had this idea. I just didn't understand. I thought that, if you were old, you really weren't if you had a limitation like that, then I just assumed almost like it just happened, that guardianship happens. And really, it's really more of the exception when it comes to, especially with autism, unless they are at ID. Even I have a client who I would say has ID and autism. And, but I don't think mom is definitely has a power of attorney, but there's no guardianship. So it's really much more expensive, and it's much more of a, I'm sure those in the the ones I've known that have had them are more like either they're like in maybe one of our homes that with my mind just went like with using the waiver homes and that kind of a place. Sometimes it's that, or I've known it for like clients who are really risky because their behaviors are so they're wandering around. If they're going to spend a lot of money, like this is where it could be protective, but they could be protected from being able to do a lot of adulty kind of things that are going to put them in danger. And that's really some of the things that I have seen. But in general, that's not often our clients. It happens, but it's not often. It's more the power of attorney is an easy thing to take care of. For an example, for my power of attorney client, with my clients is that I have a client who's in his 20s, and he struggled a lot. His anxiety, again, kind of like some things we've talked about, is that, making a phone call to say I needed a doctor's appointment was just too much for him. So he avoided a lot of things. And until he had a health crisis. And then his parents got the power of attorney. And that's really when, so they became his voice to make these appointments, to get him like a psychological appointments for the doctors. And that's really took a lot of the stress off of him. And that's just one example, but it was a way to kind of help him manage and that they could be supportive, because ultimately, obviously, as a grown-up, as an adult, nobody can stand in the gap for you or say, unless there isn't a power of attorney. But it doesn't mean that you can't also stand in the gap for yourself. So there's some questions. So here's some things I kind of mentioned earlier, just kind of reviewing, about employment and careers. Do you need assistance? Would there be, sometimes people need, like the noise cancellation headphones. Sometimes they need, they might have a more like an animal, a therapeutic animal. So there could be things like that are needed. There can be other, what would be appropriate for them. So I just encourage, there could be areas where they, are they starting to work? If they're teenagers, and they have some abilities, like, even if they struggle with like the social part, it is, can they get out of the house? I mean, I don't mean that like just to make money, but can they get a job or volunteer somewhere where they're getting to learn to work with people outside of their normal circle, and they learn to like either interact with, to finish a task or to be a part of something, because any of those little things, we just never know what, for any of us, we just never know that that opportunity connects us to something that will be in our future, could be a real help. So it's important just to kind of see, I know getting a job is like a big deal. It was for us when we were kids, and I think sometimes because with autism, it can be a challenge of like, should we allow them? And we've had, Christine and I've had a client that we shared that was a challenge. Like, she wanted a job, and the parents were like, wanted to protect her and didn't think that she could handle it. And it's like, and actually she is, and now she is working and it's good, so like, I think it's a matter of, sometimes it's like, that's the kind of stepping out for parent, to encourage parents. Sometimes they need to step out. Does that mean it's going to be always successful? No, but that's kind of how we all learn, and it's, as long as we're supportive and we're making it not be too big of too much of a strain on them. They have options, and it could be an easy way to help. And that, again, I mentioned the vocational school, vocational, because even with people who go on to college, sometimes having that exposure in high school can be really helpful for them to learn some skills that they may, just use in their lifetime. Lots of times people have, as they say, side gigs. Again, some information was just reviewing. These are just some things that we recognize that where people are challenged, and it's good to review, making, again, what is what we just learned through the living life, that is kind of having a conversation and saying, how do you deal with them, going over these issues, and like going over, like practicing how to just talking about different things, how to act when people don't understand you, recognizing that every job has things we don't like. So like, those are kind of things. Christina, have you had, what is your experience with these kind of questions or issues with your clients?
I know we shared a client, Karen, that the social skills was the problem. And one day he said to me, I just don't understand why people want to say hi to me and ask me how I'm doing. They don't care. They're just walking by and say, why do I have to respond? Like he could not understand the social aspect of why he had to respond, or even that the simple response was, I'm good, how are you, was suffice, and that they did not want to have a full-blown conversation, because that's not what he wanted. He did not want that conversation to happen. And he felt that like people were thinking he was going to be rude because he wasn't going to respond, because he didn't want to have that conversation. He said he wasn't setting himself up for that. And so I do have clients that have a lot of problems with understanding the rules, because they're not clear cut. You go into a job and there's rules, but when you start working, there's actual rules, and they don't understand, like, why wasn't this explained at the beginning? Like, it wasn't very clear cut, or they're like rules that you should know, but because it's not written down, they don't understand it. So I've had a lot of clients who are starting to work that a lot of this stuff it stumps them.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times there is an assumption, even when everybody knows it's your first job, when it comes to like how, because we kind of learn that through like almost like being in school. There's rules at school, but that kind of information doesn't generalize to autistic people. So it's important to kind of review those things. What does that mean? What to do with when you are feeling anxious, how to like just kind of talk it through, and just realize that there are always parts that we don't, how do we manage, that we all have good days and bad days, and just how to process, and how do we look for work? I mean, when I see the one that says not knowing how to get a job, I have a client who is employed, but when he has been at times when he has really looked for work to get out of what he's doing right now, he looks for jobs that are really unrealistic. they're not entry level jobs in that field. They're like really like making, you know, a decent salary, you know, a lot more. I'll just say that. And it's hard for him to understand that. He's like, well, that's how much money I need to make to like be independent on my own. And I don't disagree with that. That's a good reason, but it's the idea that everybody starts at the bottom and everybody has to like, you have to start with a job that actually they're going to look at you and go, oh yeah, you can do that. Not the job that's more of a specialist kind of job when you have never had an experience in that. So those kind of conversations need to happen. Sometimes they don't get it. And sometimes you just have to repeat it because it's going to be there. So again, write it down. These are just my thoughts of just as we're summing up, you know, we're writing things down. Where are the fears? But how do I, you know, practically go forward and, you know, so that there can be, so there's progress. So it's not about like, are you going to be here by next July? It's about, are you going to be somewhere different than you are today and making those progresses towards those things? And, you know, and sometimes the fears is sometimes of the unknown. So sometimes just even taking people places and out of their, you know, that are new to them can make a difference too. Because sometimes that's, you know, a challenge. But it's making a plan can be helpful to just, and being realistic. I think these are things that we've already kind of talked about, and really kind of recognize that there's a need for making that balance and when to support them to make those changes and to be flexible. So as we're concluding, I just want to like thank you guys for being here, and I just want to end with parents and, you know, all of you who are working with those with autism, is compassion is our best friend. It's not easy for them, and it's not easy for those parents who are working with them, and, you know, sometimes not for us. So I just want to encourage you to recognize that sometimes it just takes a minute. I think we live in a society that's goes about 80 miles an hour, and which isn't healthy for a lot of us, but those who are on autism spectrum, I'd say they're probably more like a 45 to 50, you know, miles an hour. And so it's really hard for them. And sometimes us just taking the time to understand what's really going on and not feeling and letting them feel like they're accepted where they're at, and not feel like we'll accept them when they're, you know, get these things done. And I would just say that, like with lazy, they can appear lazy, but often when I've talked to people, you know, they have like a lot of emotions. I'm not measuring up, you know, especially unless they're like nonverbal. Well, even they recognize. I'd say most those who are on the spectrum they have enough brightness to recognize that they're living life a little differently than everyone else, and they know enough to know when things aren't right. So, or like people's response to them isn't always nice. And sometimes it's just recognizing that when we're kind to them and they trust us, that we get a little further along. And they have to deal with things that, you know, we can kind of grasp, but we don't really live their life. And everybody's life is different. Everybody's needs, you know, some families have multiple kids with autism, but they're all different. And so some may work with have certain strengths that, you know, propel them forward, and where others are more, you know, maybe struggle more with mental health issues. So it's important just to know we take one step at a time, and that we're there for them, to recognize how do we encourage them and help parents not to yell and to not make them feel smaller versus or to tell them, you know, you're just really immature. Well, that would never motivate me. So I just encourage, you know, sometimes it is kind of changing our language so that we can kind of see that there's, you know, it's just because it takes longer doesn't mean it's not good. It's kind of like good crock pot, you know, good meals. Sometimes on a crock pot that's been sitting all day, just getting warm and you know, cooking that way is always better than like a microwave meal or a real something, you know, like that, you know, that's always too quick that's not really developed in cooking it. So I say that is a way of just saying, you know, we just want to encourage them to the next step. And and see them as for who they are as people, and we want to help them along. So you guys have been really good to ask questions in the middle. So if there's anything, do you guys have any questions that before we go?
Karen, I sent a question in the message about CEUs, just checking in on whether or not there are CEUs for the 2 trainees.
They're at this point, they're not. They did not for this training. They did not accept it wasn't been able to be put in.
Okay, well, I will say this is very good and really enjoyed all of it, and I can see it working for parents as well as professionals.
Thank you. Appreciate it. You guys
Thank you.
If you and if any of you did not put your name in the chat, please do. We just like to know who was here, and so we can be further. My plan is that, you know, as we move forward is to be more. We have a lot of topics that are kind of like, wow, that needs to be addressed and things like that. And I am looking at workforce development in. How that will be a training, probably, I'm not sure, but I am looking at different things that we can talk about. I think about relationships and the whole issue. I mean, I'm kind of talked about puberty in the sense of like the brain, but, you know, at some point in the next year, I'd like to talk about things that like, in terms of really how relationships work and all kinds of issues that happen with the sexual development. But can't do it all at once. And that's a really intense topic. So, and, you know, more and other pieces that are, but if you have any ideas, you're more than welcome to leave them. If you think, we could use more about stuff like this or stuff in a specific area, I'd love to hear about it then, because that's how I get, it's usually while I'm doing my research, I'm like, oh, this is, you know, we need to talk about this sometimes. So, so I get excited about it, wanting to just inform everyone and kind of, you know, celebrate the people we got. So